The gray sky over King's Landing offered no comfort to the throngs of people who crowded the winding streets. The air smelled of smoke and spice, with a sour tang of hopelessness that lingered on everyone's tongue. Underfoot, the cobbles felt gritty and slick as though coated with centuries of blood and sweat that had seeped into every crevice. The city had witnessed countless atrocities, but on this day it was about to witness yet another. The faith militant had ascended to a position of terrifying authority, and the bells of the Great September tolled in somber, drawn-out notes that carried across the rooftops. Word was spreading like wildfire. The Queen Mother, Cersei Lannister, had been deemed guilty of her sins by the most devout and the High Sparrow who led them. She was to be executed swiftly and without mercy for crimes that many whispered about behind closed doors but had never truly believed would be punished in any public manner. It was still early in the morning, and the pallor of dawn had only just given way to a faint wash of watery daylight. Small folk clung to the rumor, voicing disbelief. They can't really kill her, can they? She was queen. Some believed this was another of the High Sparrow's displays meant to humiliate a Lannister but not end her life. Yet the High Sparrow had promised retribution for the wicked. In the name of the Seven, he had judged her for her incest, her betrayal of the realm, and her exploitation of the weak. Those who had flocked to the faith militant's call believed that mercy was an indulgence the gods did not require of them. Atop the steps of the Great September, the faith's armed zealots stood in lines, their armor simple but their devotion unwavering. Their star-emblazoned breastplates and rough-hewn cudgels glinted beneath the feeble sun. Bowed heads in prayer and stern faces greeted anyone who drew near. The High Sparrow himself, clad in tattered robes, was at the sept's threshold, flanked by lesser septons and septas, all bearing austere expressions. Word was that Cersei would be brought out at midday, paraded before the people, although it would not be a walk of atonement this time, but a final condemnation. The fervor felt different than it had for her original walk. There was no show of contrition, no shaved head forced through jeering crowds. This time she had been condemned to death. Within the Red Keep, the halls felt cavernous. Pale morning light sliced through windows, illuminating tapestries that depicted glorious conquests and triumphant kings, yet these images had never felt more hollow. Servants moved in hushed, fearful steps, hardly daring to look one another in the eye. The rumor now was that the king, Tommen Baratheon, or Tommen Lannister, as many had taken to calling him in hushed corners, was in no condition to act. Some claimed he was locked in his room, too paralyzed by grief and fear to challenge the faith militant. Others said he had fled. In truth, the young king had vanished from sight after the High Sparrow's most recent condemnation, and no one had quite dared to speak out in his name. In the darkest corridors, a few Kingsguard knights paced, uncertain of their duty. Their vows demanded they protect the royal family, but the faith had declared that anyone who raised a sword in Cersei's defense was defying the will of the Seven. The knights were torn between their loyalty to the crown and the terror that the faith militant, now supported by thousands of desperate smallfolk, had become unstoppable. Though a few knights still bore white cloaks, those cloaks had never felt so thin, so useless against the unstoppable tide of religious fervor. Up in the highest spires of the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister stood alone, half of his golden hair tousled by the gentle wind that slipped through the narrow window. Even with one hand, he knew 100 ways to kill a man, but he felt powerless against the massive wave of the faith. The whispers of his sister's fate had reached him, delivering a blow to his heart. She was to die at midday, there were no more machinations to be done. And if he tried to rescue her, he would be raising a sword against the gods themselves, or, at least, against a body of zealots who believed they spoke for the gods. His jaw clenched. He was still the son of Tywin Lannister, still a knight of the Kingsguard, however fractured that concept had become. Something in him wanted to tear through the city, butcher every faith militant soldier in his path, and bear his sister away to freedom. But he knew the outcome of such an attempt. Their father had once said that a Lannister always paid his debts, but no Lannister could pay off the unstoppable might of religious mania that had seized King's Landing. Jaime's one hand tightened on the stone of the windowsill, leaving the imprint of his nails. Down in the cells beneath the Great September, the scurrying of rats provided the only respite from the silence. Cersei Lannister, once the proudest woman in the Seven Kingdoms, sat in the corner of a damp chamber. Her face was pale, gaunt from days of captivity. The shaved hair from her first walk had regrown somewhat, but in coarse patches, neither the gleaming gold nor the refined style of the queen she had been. She still held her spine erect, refusing to allow her body to slump in resignation. Even now, that lioness's pride burned in her eyes, though the glimmer seemed to waver at times, flickering in the face of an inevitable doom. She had been offered a small meal that morning, bread and water, the crust as hard as wood, and she'd barely touched it. Fear roiled in her stomach, rendering her appetite non-existent. In her mind, she seethed at the High Sparrow. How dare he pass judgment on her, he who had grown up in some corner of Westeros she had never bothered to learn, who had wormed his way into power by cloaking himself in the mantle of the Seven. She cursed him in silence. Yet a deeper sense of horror had replaced her usual cunning. She knew she had no trial left, no father or allies who might undermine this verdict with gold and threats. She was to die, and it chilled her bones beyond comprehension. The door to her cell opened. Two members of the Faith Militant, star-carved hammers at their sides, escorted a young septa bearing a small torch. The flickering light cast wavering shadows on the walls. The septa said nothing. She merely placed a thick cloak on the floor at Cersei's feet. A voice behind the septa rumbled softly, "Put that on. You will walk to the courtyard at midday. The High Sparrow wishes to show you mercy in allowing you this modesty." Cersei let out a bitter laugh, harsh in the stillness of the cell. "Mercy? Is that what he calls it? Will he grant me modesty with a headsman's swing? Or do you plan to tear at me like dogs before the public?" The Faith soldier did not respond. He closed the door, leaving the torch's glow behind. Alone with the cloak, Cersei stared at it, her mind a swirl of conflicting urges. Pride told her to appear regal, to stride forward without the cloak, to show them she was unbroken even in defeat. Fear reminded her she wanted no further humiliation, no one's eyes crawling over her body again as had happened during the Walk of Atonement. She sank her fingers into the rough fabric, feeling each thread as though searching for some ephemeral lifeline. All across King's Landing, the bells tolling from the Great September echoed in deep, methodical clangs. They rippled across the poorest slums and the richest manors, through the markets where fishmongers and blacksmiths tried to go about their business despite the tension. The city felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for a final judgment from on high. Tommen, so young and uncertain, had vanished from public view. Rumors abounded. Some said he was cowering in Maegor's holdfast, afraid of the faith, afraid of the Lannisters, afraid of the entire realm. Others whispered that he had tried to speak to the High Sparrow to beg for his mother's life, only to be turned away. Yet none could confirm the truth. As the hours passed, the sun crawled lazily upward, but a gloom hung over the day, as though even the heavens disapproved of what was to come. The courtyard outside the Great September began to fill with spectators, some curious, some grimly fascinated, some in a fervor of religious zeal, and still others simply hungry for any spectacle. The Faith Militant formed lines around a wooden platform that had been erected with chilling efficiency. A broad block of oaken wood and a large headsman's sword leaned against one side, though the question of who would swing the blade remained a matter of gossip. No official king's justice was present, and the rumors now were that one of the Faith's own zealots would wield the sword. Some said it would be Lancel Lannister, once a member of the King's Court, now an absolute convert to the faith. Others believed it would be a nameless zealot. Midday came. The bell's knell reached a crescendo of slow, terrible import, each clang resonating in the chest of every onlooker. At first, no one emerged from the September. The tension stretched, whispering through the crowd like a nervous wind. And then from the shadowed doors, the High Sparrow stepped forth. He moved without pomp, clad in plain robes, his feet shod in simple sandals. An old man who had once served as a humble septon in rural backwaters, he now seemed to loom large over the city. He walked across the broad marble steps, the Faith Militant parting around him like water around a rock. A hush settled over the assembled crowd. Standing there, his face grave, he raised both arms but spoke no words for a long moment. His expression was resolute, conveying to all that something momentous was about to take place. Finally he spoke. "We gather here before the eyes of the Seven to pass judgment on sin as the gods will it. For too long we have allowed the proud and the powerful to evade the consequences of their crimes. Today that ends." A ripple passed through the crowd. Some nodded, others frowned. The small folk might have once revered Cersei for the power she wielded, or at least feared her. But in recent times she had brought war, destruction, chaos to King's Landing, and had been rumored to be involved in the deaths of rivals. She had been arrogant, often cruel, and the High Sparrow had used every rumor, every piece of evidence of her wrongdoing to turn the common people against her. Two lines of Faith Militant soldiers stepped to either side. From the shadows inside the September, Cersei Lannister appeared. She had put on the cloak, though it hung over her bony shoulders in a way that accentuated how thin she had become. Her posture was straight, her chin raised. Though her face was deathly pale, her eyes retained that lion's pride, unwavering and unrepentant. The hush deepened among the crowd. Even if they hated her, many could not deny the aura she carried. Once the queen, always the queen in some sense. She was led by Lancel Lannister, her cousin, once her lover, and now the devoted acolyte of the High Sparrow. He wore the Star of the Faith on a rough linen tunic. His face was taut with conflicting emotions, but he kept his head high, eyes fixed forward. He guided her down the steps. No one jeered this time. This was not a walk of penance meant to shame her. This was the final act, and the crowd understood the gravity of it. The hush was so all-consuming that one could hear the faint shuffle of her feet as she walked, as well as the distant caw of a lone crow perched on a rooftop. At the platform's edge, she was brought to a halt. The High Sparrow, still standing on the steps, addressed the multitude once more. Cersei of House Lannister, former Queen Regent of the Seven Kingdoms, mother to King Tommen Baratheon, you have been found guilty of heinous sins. Conspiring to murder, incest, and other unspeakable acts that offended the gods and threatened the realm. You stand here, now, at the final hour of judgment. The gods have decreed you must pay for your sins. Have you any last words of contrition? He looked at her with what appeared to be genuine sorrow, or at least the mask of it. But she did not yield. She turned to face the crowd. The silence pressed in on her. She saw faces twisted with anger, fear, or curiosity. A few in the front row shrank back as her gaze swept them. With a steadiness that belied her trembling insides, she spoke, her voice surprisingly strong. I have no words of contrition for you. I have no confessions left to make. I have been a queen, a mother, a daughter. I have fought to protect my children and my house. And if that is a crime in the eyes of your so-called gods, then so be it. She turned a little, her gaze locking on the High Sparrow. But know this, the realm you claim to save will crumble. You sow dissent and call it faith. You bring low the mighty, but you will not uplift the weak with your cruelty. And in the end, you will see that lions do not bow to sparrows. We devour them. A faint murmur passed through the crowd. The High Sparrow did not smile, did not frown. He gave a slow nod as though acknowledging her final words. Then he gestured to the Faith Militant. She was made to step up onto the platform. She did so with her head high, her cloak trailing behind her. The headsman's sword gleamed in the noon sun, though the day was still strangely overcast. Cersei's breath hitched for the barest moment as she looked at the block. She had seen enough executions to know the routine. Yet now, when it was her turn, a tremor of terror slid through her veins. Her pride tried to force it down, but the body knows its own fear. Lancel guided her to kneel. She resisted a moment, but a second Faith Militant soldier pressed down, pushing her shoulders. She knelt. They forced her head over the block. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for the final moment of release from the tension that had built. Some eyes flickered with pity, others with grim satisfaction, and still others with the cruelty that arises from years of poverty and desperation. For a few heartbeats, it seemed that all of King's Landing inhaled as one. The High Sparrow's voice rang out, "May the Father judge her justly. May the Mother grant her mercy. May the warrior guide our blade. May the stranger lead her soul from this mortal coil." He paused as if giving her one final chance to speak or to beg for mercy. She did not utter a word. She closed her eyes, teeth gritted. Then he nodded to the executioner, another devout member of the faith who stepped forward, sword raised. Cersei did not see the blade descend, for she had squeezed her eyes shut. But she felt a rush of air, heard the whistle of steel. In one brutal motion, the sword struck. A gush of crimson splattered across the block and the platform. The crowd flinched as one. Her head rolled away, golden hair matted with blood, the cloak flaring as her body sagged. The hush continued for one agonizing moment. Then the crowd erupted with noise. Some gasped, some cheered, some cried out in shock. People surged forward to get a look at the severed head, as though in disbelief that the once all-powerful Cersei Lannister was truly gone. On the steps, the High Sparrow lowered his gaze, perhaps feigning sorrow. The Faith Militant made a circle around the platform, preventing onlookers from trampling in. There was no long speech, no drawn-out gloating. The sentence had been carried out. The High Sparrow simply signaled for the bells to ring again, though these bells had a different timbre than before, still somber, but also filled with finality. King's Landing stirred with frenetic energy after the execution. No one quite knew what would happen next. The Iron Throne stood in the Red Keep, unclaimed in all but name. Yes, Tommen was technically king, but with his mother executed and the Faith Militant ascendant, the crown's power seemed an empty shell. Rumors churned like a typhoon. Some said Tommen had quietly abdicated, others that the Faith was effectively ruling the city, or that forces from the Reach or the Vale were on the march to contest this new order. The realm seemed on the cusp of chaos once again. That afternoon, Jaime Lannister stood in his chamber, staring at his reflection in a small polished mirror. The news had reached him in a thunderclap. His sister was gone, his twin, his lover, the mother of his children, the woman for whom he had broken oaths and damned his honor. The woman he had loved in ways both twisted and passionate. She was gone in a single sword swing. His reflection stared back at him, a ghost of who he had once been. His gold hand glinted in the torchlight, a monument to all he had lost. The old Jaime might have roared in fury, might have stormed into the September with fire and blood. But the man who stood there felt hollow. A quiet anguish, far heavier than anything he had ever known, pressed down on him. He peeled off his Kingguard cloak and let it drop to the floor. As if in a daze, he turned away and left his chamber, ignoring the hush that fell over the few servants who saw him pass. He made his way through the Red Keep's winding corridors, down toward the throne room. Outside the massive doors, 2 Kingsguard knights stood guard. They wore white armor, but it looked tarnished under the afternoon gloom. They opened the doors to him, wordless, as though they recognized the sorrow in his eyes and had no wish to impede him. Inside, the Iron Throne loomed over the cavernous hall. The swords of 1,000 vanquished enemies, fused by dragon fire, curled and twisted into that monstrous seat of power. The hall was empty, save for one figure near the throne, Ser Boros Blunt, a look of uneasy confusion on his plump face. When Jaime entered, Boros made a clumsy bow. "My lord." "King's brother," Boros stammered, unsure how to address Jaime now that the old order had collapsed. I had word about the Queen Mother. Is it true?" Jaime didn't answer. Instead, he walked forward until he stood at the foot of the dais upon which the throne loomed. He could still see, in his mind's eye, the day he had stood guard when Robert Baratheon first sat there, and other memories. Tommen perched on the throne with his little legs swinging. Even Joffrey, the vile boy he was, had once slouched on that seat, sneering at the world. Now, it seemed no one dared to seat themselves upon the spiky iron. Its emptiness was a testament to the uncertainty that plagued the realm. He felt the anger rising in him, but it was a dull, heavy thing, like a smoldering coal refusing to burst into flame. "The Faith Militant murdered her," he said finally, his voice low. "They say it was the gods' judgment. I say it was butchery." Boros shifted uncomfortably, eyes lowered. Jaime slowly turned away from the throne. "Where is Tommen?" Boros swallowed. He has not come out of his chambers since dawn. He might not even know yet. Or if he does, we are uncertain how he will respond." Jaime gave a single nod. He strode out of the throne room, each step echoing in the emptiness. Behind him, Boros started to say something, then fell silent. Jaime's footsteps carried him through hallway after hallway until he reached the royal apartments. The 2 guards posted outside Tommen's door stepped aside nervously. Without a word, Jaime entered. Inside, the curtains had been drawn, and the chamber was cast in a dim, reddish light from the setting sun. Tommen was curled up on a settee near the window, his face blotchy from tears. When he saw Jaime, the boy king scrambled upright, face contorted. For a moment, he was just a child desperate for reassurance. Then the enormity of what had happened returned, and tears welled anew. Is Mother truly?" Jaime stewed there, wanting to speak, but feeling the words stick in his throat. Finally, he nodded. "She is gone." Tommen let out a broken sob, pressing his fists to his cheeks. "How could they do it? How could I let them?" Jaime strode forward and knelt at Tommen's side, ignoring the pang in his knee. He put his remaining good hand on Tommen's shoulder. "They are zealots. They believe they speak for the gods, and they have turned the city to their side. There was nothing you could have done." The words sounded hollow. He had not even attempted to rescue himself. He hated himself for that. Tommen shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I should have done something. I am the king. Aren't I? The crown, but everyone told me not to act against the faith. They said it would cause more death." His words broke off into fresh sobs. Jaime closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "We must decide what comes next," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "Mother is gone, but the realm still looks to you. If the throne stands empty, chaos will follow. The Tyrells, the Martells, the Starks, anyone might rise. The faith itself might try to place one of its own on the throne in the name of a puppet. We must act, Tommen, for House Lannister's sake and for your own." Tommen's grief seemed to make him smaller, but he managed to meet Jaime's gaze for a moment. "What can we do? The High Sparrow commands thousands of faithful in the city. The gold cloaks, do they even obey us, or do they obey the faith? Jaime grit his teeth. They are sworn to defend the city, not a faith. But men's oaths are fickle. We might have to leave the city, call upon the Lannister forces in the west. Regroup, gather allies. Your uncle Kevin is in the capital, but he, too, is overshadowed by the faith's power. If we remain here, we're caged. Tommen let out a shuddering breath. I'm afraid, he whispered. Is that wrong for a king? Jaime pulled him into a brief, awkward embrace. No, he said, surprising himself with how paternal his tone sounded. But we have to be strong now, or they will tear us apart. We must decide whether you can truly rule here, or if the faith will execute you next. Fear widened Tommen's eyes, but there was a flicker of resolve. I won't let them kill me, he said. I'm not strong like Joffrey was, or cunning like Mother. But I want to live. And I want to, he broke off, fresh tears threatening. She wanted me to be king. Jaime nodded. Then we act quickly. They spent the next hour in hushed council discussing the possibility of fleeing the city by night. But the Red Keep was surrounded by a city half under the Faith's control. The roads out might be watched. Perhaps they could slip away by ship. Or perhaps they could attempt to broker some arrangement with the High Sparrow, offer him a form of religious alliance in exchange for Tommen's life. But the notion of bending the knee to the Faith Militant galled Jaime deeply. Yet he had no illusions left. If it meant preserving Tommen from the same fate that had befallen Cersei, Jaime would consider it. The child was all that remained of that family bond. Elsewhere in the castle, chaos reigned among the courtiers. Some believed the faith might come for them next, especially those who had supported Cersei's regency. Others hoped to gain influence with the new regime, styling themselves as pious and humbly approaching the High Sparrow's representatives. Lord Kevin Lannister, Cersei's uncle and a man long known for his loyalty to House Lannister and common sense, found himself cornered in a corridor by the Lord Commander of the City Watch, a nervous man who wrung his hands incessantly. My lord, the commander said, bowing, I need to know what to do with my men. Many have begun wearing the seven-pointed star on their cloaks to curry favor with the faith. We could have a mutiny. Should I stand down? Kevin frowned. He was a pragmatic man, older now, his hair gray, lines etched into his face by years of turmoil. We cannot simply relinquish the city to the faith, he said. We must maintain order for the good of the realm. The commander sighed anxiously. But the faith has the small folk. They have captured their hearts, my lord. If we attempt to clamp down, we'll have riots, blood in the streets. Kevin placed a hand on the man's shoulder. For now, keep the peace, but do not surrender your authority. We must not appear weak. Any sign of conflict between the crown and the faith, or the crown's forces dividing among themselves, will only spark greater violence. Kevin spoke firmly, hoping to project an aura of control he did not entirely feel. We have lost Cersei, but King Tommen remains. The realm still has a king. In the winding streets of King's Landing, men and women huddled in taverns, discussing in hushed voices the sudden downfall of the Lannister queen. An undercurrent of fear pulsed through every alleyway. The price of bread was still high, and the threat of bandits or violent mobs loomed. Some believed the Faith Militant would restore order and morality. Others worried that the zealots would begin rooting out sin wherever they found it, punishing innocents along with the guilty. The city was a tinderbox, and the match had already been struck. By nightfall, rumors spread that the High Sparrow was to address the populace on the morrow, perhaps to declare the next steps in purifying the city. The tension weighed heavily on all. Mothers told their children to stay inside, men placed extra bars on their doors. Everyone remembered the violence of past conflicts in King's Landing, and many dreaded a repeat. Yet a grim excitement gripped some among the poor, who saw in the High Sparrow's ascendance a chance to topple the noble houses that had trod upon them for centuries. Deep in the Red Keep, Jaime returned to his quarters, exhausted and uncertain. He was about to strip off his tunic when a soft knock sounded on his door. Frowning, he opened it a crack. Standing there was Brienne of Tarth. She had come to King's Landing some weeks prior on a mission, a personal vow to protect Sansa Stark if she could find her. Rumors that Sansa had been in the capital had proven false, but Brienne had lingered, uncertain of her path forward. Now, her broad shoulders filled the doorway, her expression tense. Jaime let her in wordlessly. She shut the door behind her. I heard the news. About Cersei. Her voice was rough, not unkind, but direct. Jaime nodded. They butchered her in front of half the city. The bitterness in his tone was undisguised. Brienne studied him for a moment, her blue eyes flicking to his gold hand, then to his face. She spoke quietly. I'm sorry. for your loss. I know what she meant to you." Jaime let out a long breath, shoulders sagging. Not many would extend sympathy. She was hated for good reason. But she was my sister. Brienne looked away for a moment, wrestling with her sense of honor. "I never liked her," she admitted. "But I would not wish that fate on anyone." Silence stretched. Then Jaime asked, "Why are you here, Brienne?" She squared her shoulders. "The city is no place for anyone right now, especially not the innocent. The Faith Militant could be a danger to your nephew, King Tommen. If they've already executed the Queen Mother, who's to say they won't find a pretext to remove him from the throne altogether?" Jaime's jaw tightened. "I fear the same. We are trying to find a way to keep Tommen safe, to keep the throne from falling into their hands or into chaos. The child is terrified." Brienne nodded slowly. "If war comes again to King's Landing, more innocents will die. I have to ensure that Sansa Stark, if she's anywhere near, is out of reach of that conflict. But it seems there is no trace of her here." Jaime's eyes flicked with faint surprise. Even in his grief, he felt a pang of curiosity. "So you plan to leave the city? Will you attempt to take Tommen with you?" The question hung in the air. Brienne pressed her lips together in a thin line. "He is your king. You have your duty. I have mine." Jaime gave a brittle laugh. "Duty? I've broken so many oaths. I scarcely remember what it feels like to keep one." He sobered quickly. "But I need to do something. I cannot let these fanatics tear the realm to pieces." A pause. Then Brienne said, her tone hesitant, "If you need to get the boy out of the city, I might be able to help, though my first oath is to the Stark girls. If it were not for you returning my sword, giving me a chance to uphold my vow, I might be dead. Consider me in your debt. If we cross paths again, and you have need of help, I might, but I can't make that promise lightly. The road is dangerous. The realm is dangerous." Jaime glanced down at his gold hand, recalling the day Brienne had lost him the real one. Strange times indeed for them to stand here in uneasy alliance. He nodded. "I understand. Perhaps we will find another way. But I appreciate your courtesy." She inclined her head, turned, and left. Jaime stood alone in his chamber, a swirl of conflicting emotions roiling within him. Once he had believed himself the greatest swordsman in Westeros, unstoppable for the sake of the woman he loved. Now he felt powerless, a relic of another era. He longed for the simpler days when the realm's greatest threats were battles against rival houses, not the intangible grip of fanatic faith. Morning came, and the High Sparrow made his address in the courtyard outside the Great September. The crowd was even larger than before, those who had missed the execution arriving now to hear what would happen. Banners of the Seven hung from the Sept's walls, a stark reminder that power now flowed from religion as much as from bloodline. The High Sparrow, flanked by lines of the Faith Militant, spoke in a voice that carried far. "Brothers and sisters of King's Landing, hear me. Yesterday we witnessed the rightful punishment of a sinner who was once our queen. No more will the High be allowed to trample upon the low without consequence. In the eyes of the Seven, we are all equal, and we must all answer for our deeds. There is much work yet to be done to cleanse our realm. But be of good cheer, the gods are merciful and wise. They do not desire more bloodshed, only repentance. For any who have sinned, come forth, confess your wrongdoing, and receive penance. We shall rebuild this kingdom in the light of the Seven, guided by truth and humility, not by gold and tyranny." Cheers rose from the more fervent in the crowd. Others looked uneasy. A few scattered applause. The High Sparrow continued, "And for the boy who sits upon the throne, King Tommen, I invite him to stand with us in devotion to the Seven. Let him renounce the sins of his forebears, proclaim his loyalty to the gods, and usher in a new era of righteousness. Should he do so, the city will rejoice." Beneath the cheers, an undercurrent of tension buzzed. The High Sparrow had effectively told the king to kneel, to follow the faith's commands. In the Red Keep, where these words were carried by breathless messengers and whispered courtiers, it was clear that the crown was being publicly challenged. Some lords who had once supported the Lannisters were now contemplating their next move. The realm might fracture if the king bowed. Yet if he refused, it might spark open conflict. The line between crown and faith had grown dangerously thin. That very morning, Jaime tried to speak to Tommen about the High Sparrow's pronouncement. The boy sat on the edge of his bed, looking pale and drawn, his eyes shadowed from little sleep. Jaime had asked the servants to bring breakfast, but it lay untouched on a table. He wants me to kneel, Tommen said quietly, fiddling with the hem of his sleeve. Or confess my family's sins. Maybe even banish you, uncle, if you don't share in his devotion. Jaime's mouth set in a grim line. He wants power. Or if not him personally, then the faith as an institution. They want to rule the realm through you or in place of you. The question is, will you yield? Tommen's eyes welled with tears again. If I don't, will they kill me too? Like they did Mother. Jaime swallowed hard. He did not want to lie, but nor did he wish to terrify the boy further. I don't know. But we cannot let them. We have to act. If you agree to kneel and let them hold your leash, you might survive, but you will not truly be king. You'll be a puppet doing as they say. Tommen sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. What can we do? Jaime's face hardened. If we can gather enough loyal knights in secret, we might spirit you out of the city. But we would have to do it quickly, lest the Faith Militant intercept us. We could ride for Casterly Rock, muster the forces of the West. Or perhaps we go north or to Dragonstone. If we bring men loyal to House Lannister, we could attempt to reclaim your throne from a position of strength. A flicker of doubt crossed Tommen's features. But what if many of them have joined the Faith Militant or fear it? And I am not a warrior. Jaime lowered his voice. The realm does not need you to be a warrior, it needs you to be a king. The question is, how do you wish to rule? As a puppet of zealots, or as a free monarch who can chart his own path? Tommen trembled. At last, he said, if I must choose between my life under their control or fighting for what's right. I suppose I should try to be brave. Mother always said I was soft. Maybe I am. But I don't want to be a puppet. A small surge of relief flickered in Jaime's chest. Then we must move quickly. I will speak with men I trust. We'll have to slip out under cover of darkness, perhaps tomorrow night. If the Faith learns of our plan, they will close the gates. So that day, Jaime moved discreetly around the Red Keep, seeking out those who might remain loyal to House Lannister despite the Faith's intimidation. He found half a dozen knights who had served Tywin in previous campaigns and who chafed under the Faith's tyranny. Most were older men who had no love for zealots. They agreed, in hushed tones, to help Tommen escape. They would meet in the stables after midnight the following evening, disguising themselves as a small merchant caravan. But secrecy is fragile in a city as large and rumor-ridden as King's Landing. Whispers found their way to ears sympathetic to the Faith Militant. By that dusk, half a dozen armed zealots were quietly patrolling near the stables. Jaime suspected that word might have leaked, but with no confirmation he pressed on. As night settled over the city, a tension thicker than the fog that sometimes rolled in from Blackwater Bay settled over the Red Keep. Meanwhile, the High Sparrow had his own council. Lancel Lannister came to him late in the evening, the torchlit corridors of the Sept casting flickering shadows on his angular face. He confessed that some of his old family might be planning to flee. The High Sparrow listened quietly, then gave a small nod of understanding. If Tommen flees, the realm will see him as a frightened child unworthy of rule. The High Sparrow mused. But should he remain, if we can convince him to remain in piety, then the city stays calm. Bloodshed can be prevented. We must not allow chaos to take root. So we must intercept any attempt at flight. Lancel bowed, though there was a hint of internal conflict in his eyes. Yes, Your Holiness. How would you have us proceed? The High Sparrow let out a quiet sigh. We stand for mercy, not more violence. But the boy king must not be allowed to run. Let him understand that the safest place is in the arms of the Faith. If Jaime tries to remove him, let him be turned back without bloodshed, if possible. Lancel bent his head. It will be done. That night, Jaime barely slept, consumed by the plan. In the early hours before dawn, he roused Tommen, dressed him in simple clothes, and guided him through a side corridor. A half-dozen loyal knights, similarly dressed, accompanied them, each armed discreetly. They reached the stables, where a pair of plain wagons awaited, loaded with sacks of provisions to disguise their true purpose. The plan was to ride out from the Gate of the Gods, near the northeastern side of the city, passing themselves off as a merchant caravan. But even at that late hour, zealots lurked around corners, searching for suspicious activity. The group mounted up. Tommen huddled in a hooded cloak, trembling from fear and the chill air. Jaime rode beside him, glancing around warily. Step by step, they urged their horses forward, the wagons rolling out of the stable yard. The city's streets were eerily quiet. Occasional beggars clustered around corners, while scrawny dogs rooted through refuse. The flicker of torches along the walls gave the night a haunted quality. They reached an intersection near a half-ruined building. Suddenly, a group of 10 men with star-emblazoned tunics stepped into the street, blocking their way. Their leader, a stern-faced zealot with a thick beard, raised a hand. "Hold! In the name of the Seven, state your business at this hour." Jaime's knights tensed. Jaime himself kept his gold hand hidden under a cloak. He spoke in a gruff tone, adopting the manner of a merchant. "We're traveling north to Maidenpool to trade goods. Our wagons are loaded, and we wish to exit the city before dawn to make good time." The zealot eyed them suspiciously. "You have a large escort for simple merchants." Jaime forced a shrug. "Bandits on the roads these days. Can't be too safe." The zealot nodded slowly, taking a step closer. "Remove your hood." Jaime's heart hammered, but he did as asked, turning slightly so the gloom might hide his features. The zealot peered in the dim light, and Jaime offered a dismissive snort. "Satisfied?" Before the zealot could reply, another voice called from behind, "You there, hold fast." It was Lancel, stepping out from a side alley, flanked by more faith militant. He held a torch that cast sputtering light across the group. Lancel's gaze fell on Jaime, then on the cloaked figure riding beside him. His eyes hardened. "I know you," he said to Jaime, "and that is the king." Tommen sucked in a panicked breath. The knights with Jaime reached for their weapons. Lancel strode forward, raising a palm. "In the name of the Seven, I command you to stop. You will bring the king with us back to the Red Keep, or face divine justice." Jaime's jaw clenched as he realized the plan was compromised. He wheeled his horse around to see half a dozen zealots behind them, blocking any retreat. The ring closed in. There were too many. A bloody fight seemed inevitable. Tommen let out a soft whimper of fear. Then one of Jaime's knights, Ser Davin, who had once served under Tywin, hissed, "We can cut our way out. There aren't that many of them." Jaime glanced around. In truth, the zealots outnumbered them nearly 2-1, but some were armed only with clubs and star hammers. Jaime and his knights were mounted and had steel swords. Perhaps they could fight through. But Tommen, if a stray blow killed him, everything would be lost. Jaime cursed under his breath. Lancel, seeing the tension, spoke again, this time with an undercurrent of desperation. "Don't do this, cousin. More faith militant are on the way. You'll be slaughtered, and so might the boy. Lay down your arms. We don't wish to spill blood unnecessarily." Jaime's horse snorted and stamped. The knights looked to him, waiting for a signal. He was torn between the raw fury at losing his sister, at these zealots who had murdered her, and the desire to protect Tommen at any cost. Could they truly fight free? If they did, where would they go next? The city gates might be barred. They risked losing Tommen in the melee. He looked at the frightened boy who clutched the reins, trembling. Quietly, Jaime muttered a curse. He lifted his sword hand, sheathed the blade, and dropped it to his side. "We'll come," he said, voice tight. "But on one condition, the king is not harmed." Lancel inclined his head, relief flickering in his eyes. "He will be safe in the custody of the faith." "You have my word." "Your word," Jaime spat, but he had no choice. One by one, Jaime's knights lowered their weapons. Tommen slumped in the saddle, tears gleaming on his cheeks. The zealots disarmed them swiftly, and under the watchful eye of Lancel, they were escorted back toward the Red Keep. Jaime felt numb. The city around him seemed to press in like a suffocating presence, the cobbles echoing with every hoofbeat. If the faith militant had not unmasked them so quickly, they might have escaped, but betrayal or mere rumor had led to this. At the Red Keep's gates, more zealots awaited. They took custody of Tommen, gently but firmly leading him inside. Jaime and his knights were marched along. The gold cloaks on duty offered no resistance. Many averted their eyes. The faith militant had, in effect, seized the highest power in the realm. If there was a question of who truly ruled King's Landing now, it had just been answered. Tommen disappeared behind a line of zealots, escorted away to his chambers or possibly somewhere else. Jaime tried to follow, but a pair of Starhammer-armed men blocked his path. Lancel approached, face pulled taut with conflict. He placed a hand on Jaime's chest as if to keep him from forcing his way forward. Let him alone, Jaime growled. He's frightened out of his wits. He will be safe, Lancel insisted, though his own voice shook. We are not butchers. You murdered my sister, Jaime hissed, stepping closer until their faces were inches apart. He could smell the stale odor of sweat and candle wax on Lancel's robe. You call it justice, but it was murder. Don't speak to me of your false mercy. Lancel flinched but stood his ground. Her sins were many. Tommen has a pure heart. He can still be guided to righteousness. Jaime's gold hand flexed involuntarily. If you harm him or fill his head with your poison. At that moment, the High Sparrow himself appeared at the top of a short staircase in the courtyard. He looked down at the confrontation with an expression of careful calm. Sir Jaime, he called, raising a hand. Walk with me. Let us speak as men who desire to avoid further bloodshed. Jaime's eyes burned with hatred, but he felt the weight of inevitability. With the faith militant arrayed around him, he had little choice. He nodded curtly, stepping away from Lancel. The knights who had accompanied him stood uncertainly, disarmed, being watched by a half-circle of zealots. Jaime followed the High Sparrow inside, passing through a side door into a corridor that led to a small audience chamber. Guards took positions at the exit, ensuring no intrusion. The High Sparrow beckoned Jaime to sit at a simple wooden table. Jaime did not sit. Where's the king? Jaime demanded. Safe, answered the High Sparrow. He has been taken to his chambers under watch. He will be treated kindly, I assure you. Kindly, but not freely, Jaime bit out. You have him as a hostage. The High Sparrow sighed. We all have our roles in this story, Sir Jaime. I do not wish to see the boy harmed. He is young, and he can be molded into a king who serves the gods and the people rather than oppressing them. You must see that for too long, the realm has been bled dry by the greed and feuds of the nobility. Jaime slammed his gold hand onto the table. The sound was dull but forceful. Don't you lecture me about oppression. You cut off my sister's head. My family has fought to hold the realm together even if we made mistakes. And now you want to rule through Tommen. You're no better than those you condemn. The High Sparrow lowered his gaze, a fleeting sadness crossing his lined face. I do not seek power for its own sake. But the Seven have given me a duty. The realm is diseased with corruption, sin, and tyranny. The faith must cleanse it, guide it, or else chaos and war will claim countless lives. We do what we must. Jaime spat on the floor. A disease. That's what you are. He paused, chest heaving. What do you plan to do with me? Your fate remains uncertain, the High Sparrow said mildly. You have not confessed your sins, nor have you shown contrition. But I am not unreasonable. You are a knight, sworn to protect the king. If you pledge yourself to serve the king in piety and humility, if you lay aside your pride, perhaps you can remain at his side. Otherwise, you may find yourself in a cell. Jaime's lips curled in a snarl. You want me to kneel, to vow loyalty to the faith? I'd sooner cut off my other hand. A small nod. As you wish. But we can wait. I sense that in time you may reconsider. Pride is a poor shield against the will of the gods. He gestured to a guard near the door. Take Sir Jaime to the king's chambers. Let him see the boy if he wishes, but keep watch on him. Should he attempt to remove Tommen again or incite violence, confine him at once. Jaime bristled but held his tongue. The guard, a man with the 7-pointed star etched on his breastplate, beckoned for Jaime to follow. He did so, silently fuming. They passed through torchlit corridors until they reached Tommen's lavish apartments. Outside, 2 more zealots stood, arms folded. Inside, Jaime found Tommen lying on the bed, face turned away. The boy looked over as Jaime entered, eyes still rimmed with red from weeping. Uncle, Tommen whimpered, reaching out. Jaime rushed forward and took the boy's hand in his own. Tommen clung to him. They said I have to do what they say or will never leave. I'm scared. Jaime squeezed his hand gently. I won't let them hurt you. And yet, the presence of the faith militant looming in the corridor, the memory of Cersei's execution, and the High Sparrow's quiet confidence all suggested that Jaime's words were hollow. Their power was gone, and the Iron Throne now sat in a vacuum. The faith had King Tommen effectively under arrest. Word of this spread quickly through the capital. Nobles who had hoped to exploit the aftermath of Cersei's death saw that the faith was no passive caretaker. 1,000 ravens soared from King's Landing to every corner of the realm, carrying news of the Queen Mother's execution and the king's captivity. Across the 7 kingdoms, lords and ladies reeled at the shocking turn of events. Some decided to stay out of it, turning inward to secure their own lands. Others saw opportunity, an unclaimed throne in all but name, a weak king under religious captivity. In the Riverlands, Edmure Tully heard the news with astonishment as he tried to reclaim Riverrun. In the Vale, Peter Baelish, also known as Littlefinger, rubbed his fingers together in quiet glee, foreseeing ways to exploit the chaos for his own ends. In Dorne, the Martells, still smarting from the death of Prince Oberyn, debated whether they should attempt to press a claim or ally with the Faith. The Tyrells in Highgarden considered their relationship with the Faith, mindful that Margaery had once faced the High Sparrow's wrath, but also that they had lost nearly all influence in King's Landing. The North had its own troubles, as winter crept closer and the Boltons still held Winterfell, though House Stark loyalists plotted in secret. Meanwhile, rumors drifted that Daenerys Targaryen was growing in power across the Narrow Sea, though no official word had confirmed her movements. The entire realm swirled with uncertainty, like a great pot about to boil over. In the weeks that followed, King's Landing felt as though the Faith Militant had installed themselves as a second city watch. Zealots patrolled the streets, but they did not pillage or brutalize at random. Instead, they made arrests of those accused of vice, punishing drunkards, gamblers, and prostitutes in the name of moral cleansing. Tension brewed. Some small folk supported these crackdowns, grateful that criminals were being dealt with. Others bemoaned the harsh measures, recalling the days when at least a bribe to the gold cloaks might secure a moment's peace. Still, the High Sparrow's hold on the city grew. Inside the Red Keep, Tommen was allowed a measure of freedom to move about, but always with Faith Militant nearby. The old council chambers were rarely used, as most of the officials had fled or taken ill. Jaime was permitted to stay with Tommen but was effectively a prisoner himself, with no power to arrange an escape. Lord Kevin tried to negotiate with the High Sparrow, seeking to re-establish a small council. The High Sparrow calmly insisted that the Faith's presence was only to ensure the king's spiritual guidance, that no true harm was intended. Yet, in practice, no major decision could be made without the High Sparrow's approval. A gloom fell over Jaime as he watched Tommen each day, sitting with the boy as the High Sparrow or his septons lectured him on morality, humility, and the duty of a righteous king. The boy tried to learn, if only out of fear. Each night, Tommen would ask Jaime, "When will we leave? When can we be free?" And each night, Jaime had no good answer. He felt his anger curdling into despair. Across the realm, word of this new order in King's Landing spread, leading many lords to question whether they owed allegiance to a king who was so clearly under the thumb of the Faith. The notion of crowning their own kings or forming alliances gained currency. The seeds of yet another war were sown. Meanwhile, the High Sparrow made it known that Tommen would remain on the throne, but only if he embraced the Faith's reforms. Some believed it was only a matter of time before a rebellion sparked. Then, in the midst of this charged atmosphere, the Iron Bank of Bravos sent an envoy to King's Landing, demanding repayment of the crown's immense debts. With the Lannisters' grip on power severed, who would pay? The envoy arrived at the Red Keep and was ushered into an audience with the High Sparrow, Tommen, and a scattering of courtiers. It was an uncomfortable meeting. The envoy wore elegant attire, spoke with crisp courtesy, but his tone was firm. The realm owed the Iron Bank, and the Iron Bank was not known for its patience. Tommen, fidgeting under the watchful eye of the High Sparrow, had no real authority to settle such matters. The High Sparrow offered vague assurances that the Faith would oversee the realm's finances responsibly. The envoy departed with no satisfaction. In secret corners of the castle, Jaime found Kevin, whispering fervently. Kevin had the manner of a man who saw the writing on the wall. "This cannot continue," he said, voice low. "The Faith is strangling the city with fear. If we do nothing, they will remain in control indefinitely and our family's name will be tarnished beyond repair. Not to mention the possibility of lords rising against us. If there is a war, thousands will die." Jaime rubbed his forehead. "What can we do? The boy is their puppet and the Faith Militant outnumbers our loyal men in the city." Kevin's lips tightened. "We must call upon the might of the Westerlands. Rally our bannermen, bring them to King's Landing, and retake the city by force if necessary." Jaime let out a hollow laugh. "You propose a siege? Attacking King's Landing with Tommen trapped inside? That would kill him. He'd be used as a hostage or simply caught in the crossfire." Kevin grimaced. "We could attempt to infiltrate the city, free him before the battle. But yes, it would risk his life." He shook his head. "This is madness. Yet if we do nothing, we condemn the entire realm to the rule of a zealot." Jaime's eyes burned with a fierce, tired anger. "The High Sparrow must be removed," he said, voice cold. "But I will not risk Tommen's life." Kevin bowed his head. "Then we are at an impasse. Let us hope for a miracle. That miracle did not come. Instead, tension continued to mount. A series of bread riots broke out among the hungry poor. The faith militant cracked down. Then, rumors came that the lords of the Reach were mustering an army near the Mander. The Tyrells had been humiliated by the faith once, and though they had not openly declared war, the message was clear: they were watching, ready to intervene if King's Landing erupted. Meanwhile, raiders from the Stormlands tested the roads to the capital, sensing weakness. All the while, the Iron Throne sat under a boy king who could not so much as command the guard at his door without the High Sparrow's blessing. In the privacy of his forcibly shared chambers with Tommen, Jaime did his best to hearten the boy who was wilted by the daily barrage of religious doctrine. "Remember who you are," Jaime urged him quietly one night, pressing a hand to Tommen's cheek. "You're a Lion of Lannister. Even if the faith tries to make you into a tame cub, the blood of House Lannister runs in your veins." Tommen gave a shaky nod. I try to remember, Uncle, but they say pride is a sin. And everything I do, they say I must do for the gods, for the small folk. I want to help the small folk, but his voice caught. I miss Mother. I miss how things were." Jaime felt his throat tighten. "I know." He wrapped an arm around the boy's shoulders, letting him lean against him. "We'll find a way," he murmured. "Somehow we will." Yet each passing day made such hopes more remote. The High Sparrow continued to tighten his grip with a patient, unyielding strategy. More Septons arrived in the city, more devout men and women seeking to serve the cause. The Great September became a hub of administration as well as worship. In a symbolic display, the High Sparrow had the remains of Cersei Lannister buried in a modest ceremony with no pomp. Some whispered that her body wasn't even placed in the royal crypts. Officially, the faith claimed it was done to humble the mighty and show that in death, all were equal. In practice, it showed the city that House Lannister's power had truly ended. Jaime was allowed to walk within the Red Keep, but each corridor he traveled was watched. A hush fell wherever he went, servants bowing in pity or fear. He sometimes glimpsed Lancel in passing, the two exchanging cold stares laced with regret and anger. Over time, Jaime realized that his own helplessness was gnawing at him, a poison in his blood. He found no solace. Even in the training yard, sparring one-handed with wooden swords, he felt no relief. The faith militant had assigned men there as well, presumably to monitor any attempt at building alliances. King's Landing was a prison, one with tall red walls overshadowed by the Great September spells that told each day in remembrance of sinners. Finally, after weeks of stasis, a new rumor arrived on swift wings, a Targaryen banner sighted on the narrow sea. Whispers claimed that Daenerys Stormborn, mother of dragons, had at last set sail for Westeros. While no one knew her exact location or strength, the rumor alone sparked new fears. How would the faith handle a Targaryen invasion? Would lords rally to her cause, seeing her as an alternative to a puppet king? Or would the smallfolk cling to the faith's promise of moral rebirth? In the small hours of the morning, Jaime stood on one of the Red Keep's terraces, looking out over the starlit city. The domes and spires of King's Landing spread below him, quiet in the darkness. Torches illuminated the top of the Great September, where a handful of faithful kept their nighttime vigil. Jaime felt that everything was unraveling, that the realm was perched on the brink of an even greater catastrophe. And yet, a flicker of hope lingered in him. If Daenerys truly had dragons, if she could challenge the faith's hold, perhaps that would break Tommen free. Yet it would also mean war, devastation, and the possible fall of House Lannister. He touched the stump of his severed hand with his golden fingers, remembering the pain, remembering all that had brought him here. Cersei's face flickered in his mind. He saw her smirking, saw her fearful, saw her proud. His chest ached with loss. He had not even been able to give her a proper farewell, to cradle her body, to vow revenge in a tangible way. It had been so swift, so final. In the end, he was left only with regrets and a captive nephew. He realized in that moment that everything he had done since losing his hand had led him to this heartbreak. He had tried to become a better man, in some sense, but had failed to save the one who once defined him. Distantly, he heard a door open behind him, soft footsteps on the terrace. Turning, he saw Brienne, who had remained in the city longer than expected, quietly gathering any sign of Sansa Stark. She looked at him with that solemn gaze. Jaime let out a breath. The torches behind her flickered, causing her shadow to shift on the stone floor. "I heard rumors," she began, "that your nephew, the king, is under guard. That you cannot leave." He nodded. "Rumors speak true." She glanced out over the city. "And you remain captive as well?" He did not answer directly. "Why are you here?" She hesitated, then her broad shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "The city is on the brink of chaos, and my vow is to protect the Stark girls." If conflict breaks out, I need to ensure Sansa is nowhere near. Or if she is, well, I must find her. But so far, every lead is false or out of date. She paused. I heard about your attempts to flee with Tommen. He offered a bitter smile. We failed. Now, the Faith has him in a velvet cage. Brienne studied his expression. I'm sorry. He shook his head, turning to gaze once more over the city. Sorry does little to change our circumstances. Then, after a beat, he murmured, would that I had your sense of honor, Brienne. Perhaps I would not be in this position. She glanced down, recalling how many times she had clashed with him verbally and physically. Honor doesn't always protect those we care about. You know that as well as I. A moment of stillness passed between them. Then Jaime said, voice low, the Faith killed my sister. They keep my nephew captive. The realm is fracturing. I see no solution that doesn't end in more death. Softly, Brienne responded, perhaps the realm must pass through fire to be reborn. We can only try to save who we can. Jaime's eyes burned with unshed tears, though his face remained set. I've grown weary of fire and war. Brienne did not reply. They stood in silence, each grappling with their own burdens. The stars overhead twinkled indifferently to the mortal struggles below. In the days that followed, the High Sparrow announced a grand ceremony at the Great September, inviting all to attend. The rumor was that King Tommen would publicly affirm his devotion to the Seven, effectively granting the Faith official sanction to oversee certain affairs of the crown. Some said it was a coronation of sorts, a recoronation under the gods with no mention of House Baratheon or Lannister heritage. Others suspected it was merely a show, a performance meant to cement the Faith's hold on the city. When the appointed day arrived, Jaime stood near Tommen in the royal procession. The boy wore modest garments of dull gold and white, embroidered with subtle patterns of the Seven. The gold cloaks lined the route from the Red Keep to the Great September, but the Faith militants stood in equal numbers, ensuring no trouble. Small folk lined the streets, watching with curiosity and some fear. The atmosphere was subdued, lacking the usual fanfare of a grand royal event. No one tossed flowers, no one cheered wildly. A smattering of applause, a few reverent murmurs, and that was all. As they approached the imposing edifice of the Great September, Jaime's mind churned. The memory of Cersei's last walk through these streets cut at him. Now, her final memory was that block and headsman's sword. He thought he might lose himself to grief, to anger, or both. But he had no chance to act. Everywhere he looked, the Faith militants stood ready, weapons at hand. Kevin walked somewhere behind, face set in a mask of tension. Lord Tyrell was conspicuously absent, likely away from the city, consolidating his own position. Other lords who remained in King's Landing were few and subdued. Inside the Great September, the High Sparrow welcomed Tommen with the solemn dignity of a father greeting a child. Tommen was led to the altar where candles flickered and the statues of the Seven loomed overhead. The crowd inside, mostly devout worshippers and the Faith's supporters, murmured prayers. Jaime stood to one side, forced to watch as the High Sparrow delivered a lengthy sermon on the virtues of humility, mercy, and justice. Tommen, hands trembling, repeated the words the High Sparrow instructed him to say, effectively declaring his monarchy subservient to the Seven, vowing to stamp out corruption in the realm, to heed the guidance of the Faith in all matters of governance. As Tommen spoke, Jaime felt the final vestiges of House Lannister's authority slip away. This was not a monarchy in truth, but a puppet show. The High Sparrow gently placed a simple crown on Tommen's head. Gone was the ornate crown of his father. This new crown had no gold stag or lion, no mark of House Baratheon or Lannister. It bore the seven-pointed star. The significance was clear, the king now belonged to the Faith. The faithful in the sept chanted, "Blessed be the king, chosen of the Seven." Their voices echoed off the domed ceiling. The new pious crown gleamed on Tommen's head. Jaime clenched his jaw. In that moment, he hated the High Sparrow more fiercely than he had hated anyone in his life. When the ceremony ended, the High Sparrow guided Tommen to the steps of the sept, where a small crowd waited outside. Holding Tommen's hand aloft, the High Sparrow proclaimed that a new era of righteousness had begun, that the king had submitted to the will of the Seven, and that the realm would be healed. Some in the crowd cheered. Others simply watched, uneasy. Those who had lived through the War of the Five Kings could smell the tension in the air. Such pronouncements rarely ushered in peace without blood. Jaime had stood by, powerless. Now, as he followed the procession back to the Red Keep, he saw the expression in Tommen's eyes, resignation, fear, and a sliver of relief that, at least for the moment, he would not share his mother's fate. Jaime wanted to comfort him, to whisper that they would find a better way, but his throat felt too tight for words. He walked in silence, the swirling gloom within him as unyielding as the faith's grasp. Behind them, the bells of the Great September began to toll again. The sound reverberated over the city, knelling like a dirge for what remained of the old order. Cersei was gone, the throne effectively unclaimed in spirit, if not in name. The faith militant had triumphed, installing themselves as the new power behind the crown. Throughout King's Landing, from the Red Keep to Flea Bottom, from the Street of Silk to the alleys near the Dragon Pit, people stopped and listened to the tolling bells, unsure whether they announced deliverance or doom. The city's newest rumor was that other powers in Westeros would not stand idle for long. A storm was coming, whether from across the sea or from the scattered lords who bristled at the faith's overreach. War, it seemed, was inevitable, and Jaime Lannister, once the most feared knight in the realm, could only stand in the corridors of the Red Keep, a prisoner of circumstance, while the boy king he had sworn to protect bowed to men who had taken his sister's head. He found himself at a window in Maegor's Holdfast, staring across the courtyard where Cersei had once been brought out in chains. He closed his eyes, remembering her final fierce words. She had warned the High Sparrow that lions devour sparrows, and yet the sparrows had devoured her. Jaime felt the sharp sting of tears behind his eyelids. He let out a ragged breath. Somehow, in the hush that followed, he almost believed he heard her voice whispering from beyond the grave, telling him to do something, anything, to restore the power of House Lannister, to avenge her death. But he could not while Tommen was held as a living shield. So he stood, pinned between vengeance and helplessness, staring at a future he could not shape. And beyond the walls, the realm waited for the next blow to fall. The question was not if war would come, but when. The question was not if the faith militant would continue to purge the realm, but how many would die before someone or something broke their hold. And in the hush that lay like a shroud over King's Landing, Jaime listened to the bells, each peal echoing the emptiness of an unclaimed iron throne and the memory of a queen mother's blood spilled on the executioner's block. He could do nothing but wait, and hope that, one day, he might see a reckoning that freed the realm from the clutches of fanaticism and violence. Until then, the city remained subdued under the gaze of the Seven, with Tommen as its gentle prisoner king, and the ghost of Cersei Lannister haunting every silent corridor of the Red Keep, a reminder that no power, be it gold or a lion's roar, was safe from the righteous fury of a zealot's blade. Jaime Lannister stood upon the battlements of the Red Keep in the deep hush of early morning, staring out at the ghostly gray of King's Landing. The wind off Blackwater Bay carried the faintest salt tang, mingling with the stale odors of a city that neither slept nor found true rest. Beneath the walls, life stirred. Bakers lighting their ovens, butchers sharpening knives in cramped stalls, ragged urchins scampering through crooked alleys. Yet the overarching impression was one of uneasy stillness, as though each inhabitant held their breath, awaiting the next hammer blow of fate. He leaned against the worn stone, his gold hand resting awkwardly on the edge. Cersei had once teased him that he looked dashing on castle walls. She used to say his golden hair matched the sunrise. The memory cut him more keenly than any blade. The last time he had laid eyes on Cersei's face, it was spattered with blood as it rolled from the block, severed by the faith militant. He had not mustered the courage to look upon her body afterward. In his old life, he would have thrown himself into reckless vengeance. But with the faith holding King Tommen in a vice, any direct action against the zealots would put Tommen's life on the edge of the same sword that had taken Cersei's. He despised himself for it, for letting fear seal him into inaction. Each day, he ached to tear off the star-emblazoned robes of every fanatic roaming the castle. Yet he knew the real cost of such a deed. Tommen would be the first to pay. So he remained, a powerless sentinel in a keep that no longer felt like his own. It belonged to the High Sparrow now, or if not to him, then to the movement he led. Heavy footsteps sounded behind him. Jaime turned to see Ser Boros Blunt approaching, clad in what still passed for Kingsguard armor, a white tabard that looked dull in the gloom. The man offered a half-bow, sweat beading at his temple. "My lord," Boros began, fumbling in that uneasy way that had become common among those who served House Lannister, uncertain how to address Jaime now that the faith overshadowed them all. "I have been sent by Lord Kevin to find you. He asks that you come to the council chamber." Jaime's jaw tightened. "Council chamber," he echoed, thinking how that once meant the small council, with the hand of the king and the master of coin, the master of whisperers, the master of laws, the grand maester. Many of those offices now sat effectively empty, the previous holders fled or dead. "All right, let on." As they walked, he passed several faith militants standing guard at corners where the gold cloaks had once held post. These zealots wore simple armor etched with the 7-pointed star. Their gazes cold. They remained polite, an eerie politeness, tinted by the absolute knowledge that they answered to a higher calling than the crown. Jaime realized that each day, more and more corners of the Red Keep had come under the watchful eye of the faith. He wondered if Kevin had kept any vantage at all. They arrived at an antechamber near the royal apartments. Once, luxurious red draperies had adorned these walls, but they had been stripped away, replaced by austere hangings bearing the sigil of the Seven. A door stood open, guarded by 2 more devotees. Inside, Jaime caught sight of Kevin Lannister and a half-dozen men, some of them lords, some knights. Standing among them, incongruous in his tattered robes, was the High Sparrow, observing with an unflinching gaze. The tension in the room was palpable, as though a single snap of the fingers might set them all at each other's throats. Kevin's eyes flicked to Jaime. Kevin was older now, a man who had weathered countless storms. His face, lined and weary, showed a guarded relief at Jaime's arrival. "Sir Jaime," he greeted, voice formal before these uncertain watchers. "I trust you slept well." Jaime snorted softly. Sleep had been more elusive than a stag in a forest thick with wolves, but no matter. He stepped into the room, ignoring the faith guards. "Well enough." "Good," Kevin said. Then, with a slight gesture, he turned to the cluster of men around him. "We've been discussing the matter of King Tommen's authority among other pressing concerns." The phrase pressing concerns carried a weight that might have included everything from the city's finances to the rumors of Targaryens on the move. "The realm is unsettled. We all know that the situation cannot remain as it is." The High Sparrow dipped his head with a carefully benign expression. "Indeed, my lord. And we of the faith seek only to bring a sense of moral restoration to the realm, not to disrupt the rightful order." Jaime ground his teeth to stifle a sharp retort. Instead, he stood behind Kevin, crossing his arms over his chest. Around the table stood a handful of men who had not fled the city. Lord Redwine's second cousin, an old knight of the Vale with a limp, 2 minor Crownlands lords, and 1 Tyrell cousin named Mathis who seemed wholly unnerved by the faith's presence. Hardly the sum of the might of Westeros. Yet they were what remained of any council. Kevin drew a breath. "We need to form a functional government. The Iron Bank's envoy was turned away unsatisfied, and the Crown's debts are staggering. The city's stores are low. The small folk grumble about the faith's harsh policing. And beyond the gates, lords are gathering armies, some in the Reach, others in the Stormlands. We've heard rumors of skirmishes in the Rose Road corridor. How do we maintain peace, or at least a semblance of it?" An older lord with a pointed beard cleared his throat. "Should we not attempt to negotiate with the Tyrell forces near Manderford? They remain the richest house after the Lannisters. At least they have the breadbasket of the realm. If we might secure trade, or assure them that Tommen's rule is stable, we could alleviate the city's hunger." Jaime noticed the flicker of the High Sparrow's eyes at the mention of forging alliances. Undoubtedly, the faith was less concerned with forging alliances than in further cementing control. Yet the man said gently, "The Tyrells must, in turn, show humility before the gods. They have harbored their own sins, pride foremost among them. Still, if they come in peace and in good faith, we shall not turn them away." Another of the lords, with a gold chain signifying a minor seat near Crackclaw Point, muttered, "And what of the Stormlands? I've heard talk of a Baratheon cousin laying a claim. Or perhaps that was more rumor than fact. People say anything these days." Kevin rubbed at his brow. "Rumors abound, yes, but the Stormlands remain in disarray, with no undisputed lord. The Targaryen rumor also remains just that, a rumor, as no Targaryen fleet has officially landed. Though we have no Maester's ravens confirming or denying it." He gestured at the chamber's emptiness. "Our new Grand Maester was never chosen after Pycelle's death, so we have no formal chain of communication with other seats. A dozen tasks remain undone. Meanwhile, the city might starve." The High Sparrow interlocked his fingers. The faith will do what it can to feed the poor and maintain order, if the crown's resources fall short. Jaime's lip curled in disdain. He recalled all too clearly how the High Sparrow had used the plight of the poor to gain influence. The man's mild voice belied the iron resolve that had toppled House Lannister's regency. Nevertheless, Kevin gave a small nod, trying to keep a veneer of cooperation. We appreciate your assistance. The Crown will, of course, need to coordinate with you regarding the distribution of grain and coin for the City Watch, or what remains of it. An uncomfortable silence settled over them. Finally, one of the lesser lords asked in a halting tone, What of King Tommen himself? We have hardly seen him outside these pious ceremonies. He is the rightful monarch, is he not? Jaime allowed his gaze to drift to the High Sparrow, watching for any reaction. The elder man's expression was unchanging. The king is young, the High Sparrow said quietly. We must guide him carefully, so that he grows into the righteous leader the Seven, and the realm deserve. Does not the Book of the Mother speak of nurturing a child with gentle discipline? And so we must do with his grace. Gentle discipline, Jaime thought sourly. The child was a prisoner who wore a star-crowned circlet, nothing more. Yet Kevin, forcing civility, said, Of course, we only hope that the king may attend to matters of governance. The realm needs a monarch's guidance. The High Sparrow inclined his head. In due course. For now, you may bring me your proposals, and I shall ensure the king is informed. Rest assured he will sign what must be signed. We will keep the realm stable together. Together, Jaime thought, though the man's words reeked of total control. Still, Kevin and the others had no choice but to murmur agreement. The meeting ended with little resolved, but Jaime recognized the High Sparrow's tactic: patience. As the others trickled away, Jaime lingered behind, ignoring the suspicious glances of the faith militant. When he and Kevin were alone, he turned to his uncle, voice tight. This is no council at all. We parade about as though we still hold the city, yet the faith runs every corner. Kevin exhaled, rubbing his temples. I know, Jaime, but what would you have me do? Raise a sword in the throne room? They'd kill us both and Tommen too. Then the city would descend into anarchy. His eyes were weary, yet flinty with the last spark of Lannister determination. I've sent word to the west. If our bannermen can muster, if they can march on King's Landing, perhaps we can force the High Sparrow to come to terms. But that is a slow and dangerous road. They hold Tommen, Jaime reminded him. If an army approaches, they might use him as a hostage or worse. A bitter nod from Kevin. There is that risk, yes. He glanced around to ensure no zealots were within earshot. We must proceed cautiously. In the meantime, we pretend compliance. The High Sparrow is cunning, but he cannot hold the entire realm forever if the great houses unite. Jaime let out a harsh laugh. The great houses, divided by war, battered by famine, resentful of each other. They might not unite in time. And if a Targaryen truly comes, who will they fight? The faith? Or us? The entire realm might topple, uncle. Kevin's lips pressed into a thin line. We can only do what we can. For now, watch Tommen. Keep him safe. Jaime could think of no other plan, so he nodded curtly and left. He found Tommen in one of the library chambers, perched at a table piled with illuminated scrolls. Candles cast soft light on the boy's pale face. Two septas stood at either side, occasionally reading from heavy tomes on the virtues of humility, mercy, and righteous rule. Tommen glanced up at Jaime's entrance, relief and anxiety mingling in his eyes. Uncle, he said softly, I was studying. Jaime took note of the guards standing at the door, half gold cloaks, half faith militant. The arrangement reeked of the High Sparrow's attempt to fuse royal and religious power. Jaime forced a gentle smile. I see you've grown studious. Tommen ducked his head, fiddling with a quill. I have to do what they say. They say the Seven want a wise king who knows the sacred texts. I try to understand. His voice trembled. I miss Mother. She never made me read all this. Sometimes she said reading was best left to maesters. Jaime's throat constricted at the mention of Cersei. He placed his good hand on Tommen's shoulder. "Don't worry about what your mother would have done. You do what keeps you safe." One of the septas, a stern-faced woman, cleared her throat pointedly, as if reminding them both that the lesson was not finished. Jaime felt a surge of annoyance, yet he dipped his head to Tommen, letting him know silently that he could endure the lessons a while longer. The boy's eyes glistened with repressed tears, but he nodded and turned back to the texts. Jaime stepped away, heading for the corridor. The Faith Militant guard blocked his path for a moment, looking him over as though searching for hidden weapons. Jaime's gold hand curled into a fist, but he held his tongue. At last, they let him pass. With each day, he felt the walls close in tighter. Time drifted like a slow, stifling river. The city did not erupt into riot or rebellion. The small folk seemed caught between fear and a grudging acceptance. A handful of bread distributions by the faith tempered the masses' hunger. The gold cloaks, too weakened and confused to mount resistance, largely complied with the zealots' directives. More zealots arrived from other parts of the realm, men and women who believed wholeheartedly in the High Sparrow's cause. They patrolled the streets, rooting out what they deemed sinful activities: brothels, drinking halls, gambling dens. The closures caused fresh discontent among those whose livelihoods depended on such vices, but the faith pressed on. Jaime tried to glean news from beyond the city walls. Word came of men in armor riding up from the Reach, possibly to meet the Tyrell musters near Bitterbridge. There was talk that the Storm Lords might be stirring around Griffin's Roost, though no one seemed sure under whose banner. Rumors of a Targaryen fleet surfaced every few days, only to be contradicted by a new rumor. No one had a clear picture of what truly loomed beyond the horizon. Late one evening, a message arrived for Jaime. A guard rapped on his door, then handed him a small folded parchment sealed with wax. Inside, the note read, "I would speak with you. Come to the Gate of the Gods at the stroke of midnight." It was unsigned. The seal was plain, giving no clue as to who had sent it. Jaime frowned, suspecting a trap. Yet the script looked hasty, as if penned by someone anxious to avoid detection. Curiosity warred with caution. After a moment, he decided that he had little to lose. If it was a faith plot, he would handle it as best he could. Near midnight, he slipped out of his chamber wearing simple clothes and a cloak to disguise his golden hand. He navigated the Red Keep's corridors with the skill of a man who had lived there half his life, pausing to avoid the watchful Faith Militant. At one point, he nearly collided with a pair of zealots carrying lanterns, but he ducked behind a statue of some forgotten Targaryen queen until they passed. Once outside, he made his way through the cobbled courtyards to the main gate known as the King's Gate or Gate of the Gods. It opened onto the city proper, though the faith had posted a pair of armed devotees. Jaime lingered in the shadows of an archway, scanning for any sign of who might have summoned him. He saw only the guards under a lone torch. The night air was chilly, a faint breeze tugging at his cloak. Then, from behind him, a voice hissed, "Over here." He turned, hand sliding toward the hilt at his hip. In the darkness near a corner of the gatehouse, a cloaked figure beckoned him. Jaime slipped closer, nerves on edge, his mind already plotting how he might cut his way free if need be. "Who are you?" Jaime asked in a low tone. The figure raised a hand, pulling back the hood. Lamplight revealed short golden brown hair and a freckled face that Jaime recognized with a jolt. It was Lancel Lannister, his cousin, once a timid boy used as a pawn by Cersei, then reborn as a devout servant of the faith. Jaime's heart pounded with anger and confusion. "You," Jaime spat softly. "Is this a trap?" Lancel wore the star of the faith on his rough-spun tunic. He shook his head, eyes flicking toward the guards. "Keep your voice down. I had to speak to you without the High Sparrow's knowledge." His voice was tense, as though waging some internal battle. Jaime fought the urge to draw steel. "You helped them kill my sister." A flicker of shame crossed Lancel's face. "I cannot deny my part in what happened. The evidence against her was overwhelming," he swallowed, as though fighting back old guilt. "She confessed her incest, her conspiracies. The High Sparrow believed her walk of penance was insufficient, that only her blood could wash away her crimes. My voice was not the only one calling for justice, Jaime." "Justice?" Jaime sneered. "Or murder?" Lancel did not rise to the bait. His eyes had a haunted cast. "I know you'll never forgive me. I do not ask for that. I only wish to warn you. The High Sparrow grows ever more assured of his right to shape the realm. He intends to push beyond King's Landing, to remake the Seven Kingdoms in the image he envisions, where the faith stands above every house, every lord." Jaime's anger spiked. "We all suspected that. Why warn me?" Lancel licked his lips, glancing at the guards, though they seemed oblivious to the conversation in the shadows. Because he does not fully trust you. He wonders if you plan some betrayal. I have tried to counsel moderation, but others whisper that you are dangerous. He may attempt to remove you entirely if he thinks you threaten Tommen's pious transformation. Jaime stiffened, a chill crawling up his spine. Remove me how? He might arrest you on fabricated sins or accuse you of conspiring to undermine the faith. Or worse. Lancel hesitated. I speak to you now because we share the same blood once. I have done things I regret. Your sister, his voice shook. She was not innocent, but I never desired her death, only punishment. I was a fool. This new course the faith takes, it frightens me. Jaime regarded him with narrowed eyes, uncertain whether to trust a single word. You intend me to believe you're losing faith in your own cause? Lancel's face creased with something like anguish. I believe in the Seven. I believe in the need to cast out corruption. But the High Sparrow wants total dominion. That is not the creed we swore to. You must be careful, Jaime. If you are cunning, you might slip away before they tighten the noose. Take Tommen, if you can, and flee. Or find allies to challenge them openly, though that path is drenched in blood. In any case, do not stay here, waiting for the hammer to fall. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in Jaime's chest. He despised his cousin for betraying Cersei, but if Lancel's words were true, it confirmed what Jaime already feared. How do I get Tommen away? The faith never leaves his side. Lancel exhaled shakily. That? I do not know. I wanted only to warn you. Perhaps you might attempt it soon while the High Sparrow is busy negotiating with certain lords. There is a gathering at the Great September tomorrow afternoon. Many faith militant will be there. The castle guard might be thinner, though you'll need a loyal band to act quickly. He paused, passing a hand over his face. If you are caught, I cannot protect you. Jaime stared at him, wanting to lash out or scoff. Instead, he forced himself to stay calm. And why betray your fellows? Lancel's gaze turned distant. I pledged my life to the Seven, not to one man's ambition. If he will not listen to my concerns, perhaps it is the gods' will that I do what I can quietly. A moment later, he stepped back into the deeper shadows. Heed my warning, cousin. You have no more than a handful of days before the High Sparrow acts. With that, Lancel pulled his hood up and slipped away along the wall, merging with the darkness. Jaime stood there, the night chill creeping into his bones. Part of him suspected a grand ruse, but the fear that Lancel's words might be genuine was more compelling. Jaime recognized that the High Sparrow, for all his mild speech, would not hesitate to remove a threat as he had removed Cersei. He made his way back to his chambers with more caution than before. Twice he heard footsteps and pressed himself into alcoves, cursing every scuff of his boots. By the time he reached his door, his mind spun with frantic possibilities. The last time he had tried to smuggle Tommen away, the attempt had failed, thanks in part to Lancel intercepting them. Now Lancel himself was urging him to flee or to stand and fight. But how many knights still remained loyal? How many of the gold cloaks could be swayed? Another fiasco would mean Tommen's death or Jaime's own, and the realm's future would be bleaker still. He found he could not sleep that night. The bed felt cold, the shadows oppressive. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the block, the sword's gleam, and Cersei's final defiant look. He saw Tommen's wide, tearful gaze. He saw the High Sparrow's lined face, the corners of his mouth turned down in grave disapproval. By dawn, he had formed the barest outline of a plan, though it reeked of desperation. If Lancel was right about tomorrow afternoon, if the faith militant would converge on the Great September for some negotiation, perhaps that presented a narrow window to act. As soon as the sky turned gray with first light, Jaime rose and dressed, ignoring the exhaustion that weighed on his limbs. He slipped out into the corridors again, seeking men he trusted. There were few. He found Ser Davin, the same knight who had accompanied him in the first failed escape. Davin was in a deserted corner of a training yard, half-heartedly practicing with a sword. You want to try another break? Davin asked when Jaime finished relaying Lancel's warning. Are you mad? The faith is everywhere. Their men have eyes and ears in every corridor. We'll be outnumbered again. Jaime paced, heart-hammering. Yes, but tomorrow they'll be mustered at the September. If we could gather just enough of our own, a small group, quick, quiet, we might spirit Tommen to a waiting boat at the River Quay. Or out one of the lesser gates. We need speed, not force. Davin grimaced. Your uncle? Will Kevin consent? Jaime sighed. He might, if it's our best chance. But too large a group will attract attention. We need secrecy. 5 or 6 men at most. Then we ride or sail for the west. If we can reach Casterly Rock, gather the Lannister bannermen, he left the rest unsaid, they might then mount a real challenge. Davin considered. Could it work? The last time, we were discovered before we even got clear of the city. I know, Jaime admitted. But if the High Sparrow's men are mostly at the September, and if Lancel truly is helping us by letting us know, perhaps it's enough. Still, if one whisper escapes, it's over. Davin's face hardened. I'm with you. The alternative is rotting here as they tighten the leash. But we'll need to be cunning about it. Jaime nodded, relief mixing with dread. Find 3 others you trust absolutely. We'll prepare for tomorrow. He paused. Tell them no more than they need to know. Jaime spent the rest of the day in quiet tension, waiting for Kevin to emerge from yet another fruitless meeting with the High Sparrow. At midday, Kevin returned, looking more worn than ever. Jaime drew him aside into an alcove near the throne room, where the Iron Throne loomed empty, a silent testament to the collapse of Lannister influence. Uncle, Jaime murmured, I have a plan. Tomorrow afternoon, while the Faith is busy at the Great September, I intend to take Tommen out of the castle. For good. A handful of men will help. We'll sneak him to a boat or out a gate. Then we ride west. I want your blessing, or at least your silence if you cannot help. Kevin's eyes widened. 7 save us. You tried that once and nearly died. I know, Jaime said quietly. But things are worse now. If we do not act, the High Sparrow will move against me, maybe even you, and eventually replace Tommen with someone more malleable. I cannot let that happen. Lancel gave me a warning. He claims the High Sparrow plans to remove me soon. Kevin's mouth tightened into a pale line. Lancel? Are you mad? Trusting him? I'm not. But this aligns with everything I've observed. The High Sparrow calls me a threat. Better to risk flight than wait for the axe. Kevin shut his eyes, the lines of his face sagging in resignation. If the attempt fails, we lose Tommen. If you succeed, we face war. The Faith will brand us traitors to the gods, and half the realm may side with them. Jaime's voice trembled slightly. Better open war than silent captivity. A long silence stretched. Kevin rubbed his temples, then finally nodded. So be it, but you'll need help from within the castle. I can arrange a slight diversion among the gold cloaks, something that might keep them occupied. At least it could open a path for you. But if the Faith suspects anything, they'll strike swiftly. Jaime placed his gold hand on Kevin's shoulder, a clumsy attempt at gratitude. Thank you. If we can bring Tommen to Casterly Rock, we have a chance to rally the West. Then maybe we can force the Faith to negotiate on more equal terms. Kevin sighed. I'll do what I can. May the gods have mercy on us. That night, Jaime again found no sleep. He paced in his chambers, checking his sword belt, loosening the joint of his gold hand to ensure it would not impede him if he had to fight. He considered forging a dagger mount into the gold hand's hollow interior, but there was no time. Instead, he sharpened the short blade at his hip. Tommen, of course, was unaware. The boy had gone to bed under the watchful eyes of 2 Faith Militant. Jaime had no plan to warn him ahead of time. Surprise would be crucial. Morning dawned gray and damp, fitting the mood that pressed on Jaime's chest. A chill drizzle fell from a sullen sky, turning the cobblestones slick. The High Sparrow's summons soon arrived for Tommen to attend a midday assembly at the Great September. Some further discussion with visiting Septons, or so rumor had it. Jaime's gut twisted. Lancel's information had been correct. The zealots would gather that day. So, in the corridor near Tommen's chamber, Jaime lurked, waiting for the moment the boy would be led away. Sure enough, around midday, a Septa and 2 Faith Militant came to escort Tommen out of his rooms. They walked down the corridor. Tommen, though wearing the star-crowned circlet, looked meek, his shoulders hunched. Jaime followed at a discreet distance as though part of the entourage. None questioned him. He was still recognized as the boy's protector, albeit in name only. They reached the Red Keep's outer courtyard, where a covered litter awaited, presumably to carry Tommen to the September. Jaime counted nearly 24 zealots there, forming ranks around the litter. That was far too many to confront openly. His pulse hammered with dread. The plan hinged on some portion of these zealots departing for the September on foot or to handle crowd control. If they all remained glued to Tommen's side, escape would be impossible. Then Kevin's promised diversion unfolded. At the opposite end of the courtyard, an argument erupted among a group of gold cloaks. Shouting rang out. Someone had brandished a pike at another's chest. The commotion drew the zealots' attention. Tommen's escort paused, uncertain. More gold cloaks rushed in, flailing and shouting about pay, about being shorted from the crown's coffers. A brawl threatened. The faith militant officer barked orders for half his men to go break up the scuffle. 10 zealots peeled away from Tommen's litter, hustling toward the fray. The officer remained behind with the rest, but their attention was split now, eyes flicking between Tommen and the ruckus. Jaime took a slow breath. This was the sliver of opportunity. Davin and 3 knights he trusted hovered nearby, disguised as gold cloaks. Another 2 men stood across the courtyard. Jaime began to circle around the litter, calling out as if to help quell the fight. One of the zealots turned to him, half exasperated. "Sir Jaime, see if you can calm them. We must keep the peace in this courtyard." Jaime nodded, striding that direction. But just as the zealot turned away, Davin swiftly moved behind the guard, clamping a hand over his mouth and pressing a dagger to his throat. The guard's startled grunt went unheard beneath the courtyard's noise. Another knight pounced on the second zealot who was closest to Tommen, muffling him in a chokehold. In a matter of heartbeats, 4 or 5 zealots were seized in similar fashion. One managed to let out a cry, but Davin silenced him with a quick blow of his pommel. Tommen stood there, eyes wide, trembling. "You, uncle?" he whispered. Jaime seized Tommen's arm, pulling him away from the litter. "Come with me quickly." No shouting. Tommen looked half ready to faint, but he followed, clutching Jaime's hand as they sprinted toward a side gate that opened onto an inner courtyard. Davin and the others raced behind them. At least 8 zealots had either been captured or disabled. If any had escaped, they might still raise an alarm, but the courtyard's confusion was intense. They spilled into the next courtyard, the drizzle turning to a steady rain. Jaime led them to a postern door that opened into the city. An old guard in battered Lannister livery was waiting, holding the door ajar. He gave Jaime a tight nod. "Be quick. Faith men are roving the streets." Jaime nodded back, hustling Tommen through. Davin's group followed, and the guard slammed the door behind them, dropping the bar. Ahead lay a narrow alley that snaked into the city. The plan was to slip through side streets, reaching the river gate or the quays, where a small boat waited. Kevin had bribed a few oarsmen to remain alert for them, but the alley was not as deserted as hoped. Halfway along, 2 zealots with clubs stood under a sagging balcony, apparently searching for something. They spotted Jaime's group at once. "Halt!" one shouted. "In the name of the 7. Davin didn't hesitate. He lunged, sword slicing through the rain. The zealot raised his club to block, but steel bit into flesh. The man screamed and went down, clutching his bleeding arm. The other zealot backed away, but one of Jaime's knights tackled him, slamming him into the wet cobblestones. The man cried out, "Traitors to the faith!" before a gauntlet fist knocked him senseless. Tommen was panting, terrified. Jaime grabbed his shoulder. "We keep moving. Come on." They dashed further into the alley, ignoring the rivulets of water streaming from eaves overhead. Jaime's heart thundered. The entire city could be alerted at any moment. They pressed on, weaving between crooked buildings. The streets were nearly empty due to the foul weather. Occasionally, they glimpsed a cluster of small folk huddled under awnings, who stared at the sight of Tommen in his star-crowned circlet, escorted by armed men. Jaime barked at them to clear the way. A hush followed them, broken by mutters of confusion. Word would spread. They had to move faster. Finally, they reached the river gate, which overlooked the Blackwater Rush as it curved around the city's southern flank. There, 2 gold cloaks, likely Kevin's or Davin's allies, stood watch. They were about to wave Jaime through when a voice rang out from behind. "Halt in the name of the faith! More zealots!" Jaime glanced back to see at least 6 men pushing through the wet street, weapons at the ready. Their leader, a tall man with a star carved into his forehead, pointed a mace. "That's the king. Surrender him." A moment of madness seized Jaime. He recalled all the times he had fought impossible odds. His hand itched for his sword, but there were 6 zealots, each likely fanatical. He had 5 knights with him. The gold cloaks at the gate might join in, or they might falter, uncertain. Tommen let out a whimper. Jaime's jaw set. He and Davin drew steel as one, stepping to shield Tommen. The zealots charged, weapons raised. Steel met Starhammer in a spray of rainwater. Jaime parried a blow with his golden hand, feeling the jarring impact rattle his stump. He grit his teeth and slashed forward with his real hand, opening a zealot's shoulder. The man hissed in pain but swung again. Davin and another knight locked blades with two more zealots, while Tommen crouched behind them, wide-eyed. One zealot lunged at Jaime from the side. Jaime twisted, the sword's edge scraping off his gold hand with a shriek of metal. He kicked the attacker's leg out from under him, then drove his blade into the man's chest. The zealot gasped, eyes rolling back. Another hammered at Davin's side, but Davin ducked under the blow and rammed his shoulder into the zealot's midsection, sending him sprawling into a muddy puddle. In the swirl of combat, Tommen cried out as a star hammer came dangerously close to his head. One of Jaime's knights threw himself between Tommen and the attacker, taking the hammer blow to the shoulder with a sickening crunch. He went down, howling in pain. Jaime lunged, sword flicking, and slashed the zealot's throat. Blood sprayed across the cobbles, mingling with rain. A heartbeat later, the final zealot fell to Davin's blade. The street was left with the bodies of fanatics sprawled in the grime, red mixing with rivulets of water. Tommen trembled, tears streaming down his cheeks, whether from fear or the sting of rain, Jaime could not tell. The guard at the river gate gaped in horror, uncertain. Jaime seized Tommen's arm again, his breath ragged. "Open the gate," he snarled at the gold cloaks. "Now, or do you want the faith to take your heads as well?" That spurred them to action. They heaved the massive wooden gate open just enough to let them through. Jaime urged Tommen forward. Beyond was a short stretch of quay leading to the edge of the Blackwater. A small skiff bobbed there, manned by two oarsmen wearing plain cloaks. Davin hissed, "Come on. We have no time." One of their knights lay moaning, severely injured. Another knight stooped to drag him along, ignoring his cries. Jaime knew they could not simply leave a man behind to be tortured by the faith, so they half-carried him, wading through shallow puddles, hearts pounding at every distant shout that echoed off the city walls. They reached the boat. The lead oarsman, an older man with lines etched into his face, looked from Jaime's drawn sword to Tommen's circlet with wide eyes. "Gods preserve us," he muttered. "Ain't no easy voyage ahead if the faith be after you." "Shut up and row," Jaime growled, lifting Tommen over the gunwale and setting him gently on a bench. The wounded knight was helped in next, groaning with each movement. Jaime and Davin climbed aboard, swords still in hand. The second oarsman hastened to cast off, pushing away from the quay. The faint lapping of water against the hull filled Jaime's ears, mingling with his own harsh breathing. As the boat drifted into the Blackwater rush, Jaime glimpsed movement atop the city walls. Zealots or gold cloaks, it was impossible to say. Perhaps they were already stringing bows. He shouted to the oarsmen, "Row. Row or we're all dead." The men bent their backs, pulling hard against the swift current. Tommen clutched the side, his face pale and streaked with rain. A few crossbow bolts whistled through the air, splashing into the water around them. One hissed dangerously close, but by sheer luck, none struck the skiff. Soon, they were far enough downstream that the city's walls blurred behind the curtain of rain. Jaime finally let out a shaking breath. They had escaped King's Landing, at least for now. Yet his relief was tempered by the knowledge that they had only crossed the first threshold. The realm was vast, and they were but a handful of fugitives with the rightful king among them. The High Sparrow would brand them heretics, criminals, kidnappers. The faith militant would not rest until they were recovered or killed. Jaime glanced at Tommen, who looked so small and terrified, shoulders hunched against the drizzle. Part of him wished he could comfort the boy. But all he could do was place a hand on Tommen's head and murmur, "It'll be all right," though he was far from certain it would. Over the next hour, the skiff drifted downstream, the oarsmen rowing intermittently to keep them from hitting shallow spots. Jaime kept his eyes on the banks. They needed to land somewhere away from main roads, away from large towns that might host a faith presence. At last, the older oarsman pointed toward a small inlet lined by reeds and tall grass. The area was deserted, no sign of dwellings. "Perfect for a hidden landing. We can put ashore there," he said. "After that, I don't know. There's an old forest track that leads west, maybe. Haven't used it in years." Jaime nodded. "That will do. We'll pay you well, if we can. After that, you should row on wherever you will. The faith might hunt you if they learn you helped us." The man looked grim. "We're old men and times are hard. Take your fate with you and let us keep ours. That's all we ask." When the skiff scraped onto the muddy bank, Jaime hopped out first, sword ready, scanning the surroundings. The drizzle had tapered off, leaving the air thick with moisture. The reeds swayed in a gentle breeze. No sign of watchers. He helped Tommen step onto firm ground, then offered a hand to the wounded knight, who hissed in pain but managed to stand. Davin slid out next, checking to ensure no tracks would be obvious from the water's edge. They trudged up a slight slope away from the river. The boatman pushed off again, vanishing downstream. Jaime looked around at the bedraggled group. Tommen was soaked to the skin, trembling. The wounded knight was unsteady, red blooming across the makeshift bandage on his shoulder. Davin looked grim, scanning for a path. At length, they found a faint trail that led through a stand of willows and beyond. They followed it, hearing only the squelch of their boots in wet earth and the rustle of leaves overhead. Jaime's mind raced. They needed horses, provisions, a place to shelter. But their gold was limited, they had only what they could carry. If they came across any villagers, they risked being recognized. They walked for nearly an hour with no clear destination. The terrain rose and fell gently. Eventually, the path widened slightly, merging with what looked like an overgrown lane. Shallow puddles reflected the overcast sky. Tommen stumbled, exhausted, and Jaime paused to kneel beside him. "It's all right," he murmured, trying to keep his tone reassuring. "We'll rest soon, I swear." Tommen nodded, lips parted in ragged breaths. What if the faith finds us?" Jaime gently squeezed his arm. "They won't if we're quick. We'll find a safe place and then journey west to Casterly Rock." Tommen swallowed. Mother always said it was the safest place in the world. A lump rose in Jaime's throat. "It is. I'll see you safe there." They pressed on, forging deeper into the countryside. As night fell, they found an abandoned shepherd's hut near a cluster of stony hills. The roof sagged, but it offered some shelter from the drizzle that had begun again. They huddled inside, lighting a small fire. Davin checked the wounded knight's shoulder, grimacing. "He needs a maester, or he might lose the arm." Jaime cursed softly. "They had no maester here. We'll have to keep it clean," he said. "We'll make for a nearby village in the morning, see if we can buy or barter for horses." One of the other knights looked uneasy. "If the villagers are devout, they might turn us in the moment they see the boy. He is recognized." Jaime was painfully aware of Tommen's circlet. "We'll remove the crown, obviously. Call him a distant cousin if anyone asks. He's just a boy. We can say he's ill." Tommen took off the star-crowned circlet with trembling fingers as though it clung to him like a curse. Jaime watched him set it aside. In the flicker of firelight, Tommen's face looked ghostly. He had not only lost his mother, he had lost his city, his illusions, his childish trust in the world. Jaime felt a surge of protective anger at the faith, at the realm's hypocrisy, and perhaps at himself for not intervening sooner. That night, they took turns on watch. Jaime's watch was long, haunted by the wind sighing through cracks in the hut's walls and Tommen's fitful breathing. The wounded knight moaned in his sleep, feverish. Davin muttered a string of half-formed curses as if cursing the gods for bringing them to this pass. Jaime stared into the dying embers, half believing he saw Cersei's face flicker in the coals. The memory of her final day, her shaved hair, her humiliation, her defiance, and then the headsman's blade returned in painful clarity. He closed his eyes, trying to will the memory away. Morning came slow and bleak. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained shrouded in gray clouds. They rose stiffly, munching on the few provisions they had managed to bring. The wounded knight, named Ser Lucas, was pale, sweat beading on his brow. Jaime knelt to check the wound. A dark stain had spread across the cloth. Infection might be setting in. They had to find help soon. They ventured onward through rolling meadows. The path was barely a trail, but after several hours they glimpsed a smoke column rising beyond a knoll. A settlement, or a farm at least. Carefully they approached. Eventually they found a modest village, a cluster of huts, a small sept of wattle and daub, a well at the center, and some outlying fields. A few goats wandered among makeshift fences. It was no more than 30 souls living here, but to Jaime it looked like potential salvation or disaster. If these folk were loyal to the faith, they might be turned in. But they had no choice. Ser Lucas needed a healer, Tommen needed food and rest, and the entire group needed horses. Jaime and Davin took the lead, urging Tommen to stay back with a knight or two in the bushes, hidden for the moment. As they approached the village, a few wary faces peered from doorways. An old man, wearing a rough tunic belted with rope, stepped forward, squinting. "Halt there," he called, though his voice trembled. "What's your business, armed men?" Jaime spoke in a calm tone he had learned in years of knighthood. "We're travelers. Our friend is wounded. We seek a maester, or at least a skilled healer. We can pay." The old man scratched his patchy beard. "No maester here, but we got an old woman who knows her herbs. She might help if you've got coin. Are you outlaws?" "Soldiers." Davin answered, "Soldiers, in a way. But we mean no harm. We'll pay for help and be on our way." The old man beckoned them forward, though he eyed Jaime's gold hand with curiosity. "Best see old Hannah, then. But mind you, we're simple folk. No trouble here? We've had enough trouble since the last war. Jaime offered a tight smile. No trouble from us so long as you keep quiet about our passing. At that, the old man frowned. You're fleeing something? Yes, Jaime said, not elaborating. You're better off not knowing. Unease flickered in the man's eyes, but he nodded. Come on then. I'll show you to Hannah's hut. They fetched Tommen and the others, carefully keeping Tommen's face overshadowed by a hood. The villagers watched from a distance, muttering among themselves. The old man led them to a squat hut near a chicken coop, rapped on the door, and an elderly woman with sharp eyes answered. She took one look at Ser Lucas's wound and waved them inside without ceremony. The hut was cramped, cluttered with bundles of dried herbs and earthenware jars. The air smelled of sage, garlic, and something acrid. Old Hannah clucked her tongue and gestured for them to lay Ser Lucas on a rickety table. Then she set about cleaning the wound, applying a pungent poultice. Jaime hovered, ready to intervene if the man cried out, but Lucas only winced and clenched his teeth. Hannah spoke in a reedy voice. That's a nasty cut, festered some. Lucky you brought him quick. Another day or two he'd be lost to the stranger for sure. She hunched over the wound, carefully stitching with a needle she heated in a candle flame, humming under her breath. Jaime let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Tommen, who stood by the door, gazing around with wide eyes. A chicken clucked past his feet. The boy looked entirely out of place in this humble setting, as if a piece of the Red Keep's grandeur had wandered into a tumble-down barn. Jaime gently guided him outside, letting Davin watch over Lucas. Outside, the old man who had greeted them was staring at Tommen's hooded form as though suspecting something. Jaime steered the boy away, hoping to keep him from scrutiny. A short while later, old Hannah emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. The soldier will live if he rests proper. I done what I can. Payments due. Jaime handed her a small pouch of silver stags, more than she probably saw in a year. Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, merely dipping her head. Then she looked at Tommen, still cloaked. What's wrong with that one? He's pale as a ghost. Tommen flinched at her scrutiny. Jaime quickly shook his head. He's just exhausted. We've had a difficult journey. She eyed them for a moment longer, then shrugged. So be it. Now, best you find some place to rest, let the wounded man heal. If you aim to move on soon, well, that's your business. Davin stepped out of the hut, having ensured Lucas was settled. We still need horses, he reminded Jaime in a soft murmur. We can't walk all the way west, not with a wounded man. Jaime grimaced. We might ask the villagers if they have any to sell. But when he broached the subject, the old man shook his head. We've only 2 plow horses, old and slow. And a half-lame mare. Not fit for outrunning anything if that's your plan. A wave of frustration washed over Jaime. We'll pay for whatever you have, at least so we can carry our wounded. We don't need speed, just enough not to walk on foot. The man scratched his head. All right, but we can't sell both plow horses or we'll starve come planting season. We can part with the mare, maybe 1 plow horse. For a fair price. Jaime ground his teeth but agreed. They bartered with silver, leaving Jaime's purse significantly lighter. Soon, they had an ancient mare with a drooping back and a broad plow horse that looked more accustomed to dragging logs than carrying knights. Still, it was better than nothing. They rigged a rough travois for Lucas so he could ride lying down since he could barely sit upright. The rest would have to walk or share the plow horse for short spells. While preparing to depart, they gathered in the lane near the well. The villagers hovered at a distance. Tension hung thick in the air as though everyone sensed something amiss. Davin pulled Jaime aside. We won't make good time like this. Every mile we travel, the faith gets a mile closer behind us. They have horses, better ones. If they get wind we're on this road, we're done. Jaime swallowed, looking at Tommen, who rubbed his eyes, dark circles beneath them. We'll have to avoid main roads. Stick to forest tracks, farmland paths. Maybe we can slip by any patrols. Before they could continue, a small boy with messy hair ran up to them, panting. Midas saw soldiers on the road, back near the orchard. Had the star on their chests. They might be coming here. A jolt of alarm shot through Jaime's veins. How many? The boy shrugged, eyes wide. I dunno. More than 5. Dread settled like a stone in Jaime's gut. The faith militant must already be scouring the countryside for them. We have to leave now, he said, turning to Davin. We can't let them trap us here. Davin barked orders to the other knights, who scrambled to get Lucas secured on the travois. Tommen mounted the old mare, gripping the reins with trembling hands. Jaime noticed the suspicion in the villagers' eyes intensify. If the faith arrived, they would question everyone. The risk was immense, but there was no other way. They had to flee. They set off at once, heading west along a rutted track that skirted the orchard the child had mentioned. The horses plodded, slow and plowbred. Rain clouds still churned overhead, threatening another downpour. The moan of the wounded knight and Tommen's ragged breath were the only sounds for a time. Then, from behind, Jaime heard the distant clatter of hooves on wood, a small bridge or a cart path crossing. Faster, Jaime urged, though the plow horse could only manage a slow trot. The orchard loomed to the left, rows of gnarled apple trees. Jaime weighed the risk of hiding there. If they left the main track, the faith might sweep it. Yet the orchard provided cover. This way, he hissed. Off the road. Into the trees. They guided the animals down a gentle slope into the orchard's uneven rows. Fallen apples squelched underfoot, the trees leafless in the late season. They found a cluster of particularly thick trunks, half concealed by brush. Davin motioned for quiet as they dismounted and led the horses behind the brush. Even Tommen slid off, wincing at the damp ground. Lucas lay groaning softly on the travois, but another knight clamped a hand over his mouth gently, whispering for him to hush. Moments later, the sound of hooves on the track reached them clearly. Jaime crouched, heart pounding. The brush obscured their view, but he could make out the faint echo of voices. They might have come this way, a man said, loud enough to catch. Another voice responded, spread out. Search the orchard. The Lord Septon wants them found, especially the boy. Jaime tensed. If these zealots combed the orchard thoroughly, it would be over. They heard more hooves, the snort of a horse close by. Jaime's mouth went dry. He glanced at Tommen. The boy clutched Jaime's cloak with white-knuckled hands. The orchard rustled as men moved among the trees. Then a star hammer swung into view, carried by a zealot just a few paces away. The man peered around, but the brush where Jaime's group crouched was thick. Jaime fought the urge to leap out and strike him down. If he did, the noise might bring the others. They had to remain silent. The zealot hovered for a moment, scanning the orchard. Then another called, anything? The man spat. Nothing here. They heard him ride off to continue the search. Jaime's pulse hammered so loudly he feared it would betray them. But the footsteps and hooves receded, drifting farther away. They waited a long time, hardly daring to breathe. Rain started again, a steady patter on the orchard's naked branches. Finally, Davin exhaled quietly, whispering, we can't stay here. They'll keep searching. We have to slip away before they tighten the net. Jaime nodded, swallowing the dryness in his throat. Let's circle around. We might find a back route to the next town. He suppressed a surge of despair at how difficult each mile was proving. If the faith had already come this far, they could expect more pursuers. Yet there was no going back. Carefully, they led the horses deeper into the orchard, trying to move parallel to the track but out of sight. Tommen's boots squelched in wet earth and the wounded Lucas was half delirious. One of the knights all but carried him. It felt like a slow march to the stranger's embrace. Jaime kept scanning the gloom. On and on, the orchard seemed endless, each row of trees identical in the dim, rainy light. At last, they emerged onto a narrower path that angled west-northwest. The hooves of pursuit were distant now, perhaps searching in another direction. Davin took the lead, guiding the exhausted plow horse. Jaime kept Tommen close, occasionally lifting him if the boy stumbled in the mud. Their provisions had dwindled to scraps. There was no sign of a large settlement. The land was gently rolling farmland dotted with the occasional, forlorn stand of trees. Night fell and they pressed on, hoping to put distance between themselves and the faith. But the wounded man's groans grew louder, fever spiking. He coughed, spitting up phlegm. At length, they realized they had to stop again to tend him, despite the risk of being overtaken. Desperation gnawed at them. If they paused, the zealots might catch up. If they kept going, the man might die. Tommen's wide, frightened eyes flicked between Jaime and the others as though silently begging for reassurance. In the end, they stopped in a small copse of birch trees. Rain dripped from the canopy, forming puddles on the ground. They tried to make a hidden camp, using cloaks to form a lean-to. The horses stood with heads lowered, steam rising from their flanks in the cool air. Lucas was delirious, his face pale, breath ragged. Old Hannah's salve had helped, but his wound needed more professional care than a bag of herbs. Jaime knelt by him, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. The knight's eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain. I'm sorry, Lucas rasped. I slowed you down. Quiet, Jaime murmured. We're in this together. He was no maester, but he did his best to clean the wound again, ignoring the putrid smell of infection. Tommen hovered close, tears shining in his eyes. The boy had never been so near the raw reality of death. King though he was, Tommen seemed younger than ever. Jaime gently shooed him away before the sight could worsen his nightmares. The next day dawned with a break in the clouds. Weak sunlight filtered through, igniting the birch leaves that still clung to some branches. Lucas's condition had stabilized somewhat, though he was in no shape to travel far. Jaime decided they must keep going in short spurts, resting often all the while watching for pursuers. 2 more days of cautious travel wore them down to the bone. Their boots caked in mud, cloaks torn by brambles, rations nearly gone. They avoided any large roads, circumventing villages to keep from being spotted. Yet rumors of a search party seemed to drift everywhere. They overheard farmers muttering about the faith militant passing through, questioning everyone. Some said the High Sparrow had offered a bounty for the boys' safe return. Others whispered that the small folk risked excommunication if they harbored the Child King and his guardians. Fear was a powerful lever. Despite it all, they pressed doggedly west, though the pace was a crawl. The plow horse was near spent and the mare fared little better. Lucas hovered between life and death. And Tommen, the boy, had begun to turn inward, silent and haunted, as though the weight of losing his mother and his throne had crushed his spirit. One afternoon, as the autumn sun slanted through a thinning canopy of trees, they reached a rough crossing, a small wooden bridge spanning a shallow stream. A battered sign read, "River Road," with an arrow pointing north. Jaime paused, scanning for movement. All seemed quiet. The westward path on the other side would lead them closer to the Westerlands. If they followed it far enough, perhaps they could reach the foothills of the crag or another Lannister-friendly holdfast. The question was whether the Faith would have men posted there. They started across the bridge, hooves clunking on sodden planks. Then, from across the stream, horses appeared, 4 or 5 riders, each clad in armor that glimmered faintly in the sun. Jaime's pulse soared. In that instant, he expected more zealots. He reached for his sword, heart pounding. But as the riders drew closer, he caught a glimpse of the device on their surcoats, a golden lion on a crimson field. House Lannister. Relief warred with caution. Were these truly their allies, or had they sworn themselves to the Faith? He raised a hand to signal a halt. Davin and the other knights tensed, forming a protective line around Tommen, who perched on the mare. One of the riders came forward, face visible beneath an open helm. He was a lanky man in his early 30s, with a trimmed beard and a hawkish nose that Jaime recognized from campaigns in the Westerlands. "Ser Miles," Jaime said, voice echoing across the water. "Is that you?" The man blinked, then a broad grin spread over his features. "Jaime Lannister? By the gods, we heard you were in King's Landing, under the Faith's watch." Jaime guided his horse forward across the last stretch of bridge, never taking his hand from the hilt of his sword. He nodded curtly. "We escaped. And we have the king." At that, Ser Miles's eyes widened. He peered past Jaime, spotting Tommen in the ragged cloak. Surprise melted into confusion, then a glimmer of understanding. 7 hells. We'd heard rumors that the Faith had seized him. "I suppose they did, but he shook his head in wonder. "We were scouting the roads on Lord Kevin's orders. Word reached us that you might try to reach the west. We've been searching every byway for sign of you." Jaime breathed a shaky sigh. So Kevin had indeed rallied men from the west, or at least begun to mobilize them. "Are you alone out here?" "The roads are thick with zealots." Miles gestured behind him to his small troop. "We have a company of near 40 men camped an hour's ride from here. Not a huge force, but enough to deal with local pockets of faith militant. Lord Daemon Lannister is in command by Kevin's arrangement. Our job is to protect Lannister lands from zealot intrusion." Jaime caught Tommen's eye. The boy gazed at these riders with a spark of hope, as though glimpsing salvation at last. Jaime turned back to Miles. "Then let's get out of the open. We have a wounded man. The king is exhausted. We could use shelter and real food." "Of course," Miles said, beckoning them to follow. "Our camp is in a hollow by an old mill. We have a maester traveling with us. He can tend your knight's wounds." Gratitude flooded Jaime, and he signaled Davin to proceed. The battered group of fugitives followed the Lannister riders along a faint path westward. Tommen swayed in his saddle, fatigue etched in every line of his small frame. Jaime rode beside him, occasionally steadying the boy. Relief threatened to overwhelm him. They might be safe, at least for the moment. Sure enough, within the hour, they reached the Lannister outpost, a ring of tents nestled among tall grasses near the remains of a stone mill. A shallow river meandered past. Banners bearing the golden lion snapped in a breeze. Soldiers in half-plate bustled about, some sharpening swords, others tending horses. At the sight of Jaime's party, a wave of surprise rippled through the camp. Men paused, murmuring among themselves. One man, older and broad-shouldered, strode forward from a larger tent. He had steel-gray hair and the stern countenance of a seasoned commander. Daemon Lannister, cousin to Kevin, if Jaime recalled correctly. "Jaime," Daemon said in a deep voice, taking in the ragged group. Then his gaze fell on Tommen, who had pulled back his hood, revealing his pale, boyish face. Daemon sank to one knee. "Your Grace, we feared the worst." Tommen just nodded shakily as though uncertain how to respond to such deference after weeks of captivity and flight. Jaime dismounted, guiding Tommen down from the mare. He's exhausted, needs rest. One of my knights is gravely wounded. We're all half-starved. Daemon barked orders and men rushed forward. A tent was cleared for Tommen. Another soldier helped carry Lucas to the maester's tent. Jaime could almost weep with relief at seeing the white-robed maester fussing over the wounded man with real equipment instead of a crude herbal poultice. A pot of stew bubbled over a cook fire. Soldiers offered fresh water to wash away the grime. Tommen practically collapsed on a camp stool, letting out a choked sob as the tension drained from him. While the boy ate, Daemon and Jaime spoke off to the side. Daemon wore a measured expression, the worry-etched lines in his brow. We have orders from Lord Kevin to escort you both to Casterly Rock if possible. But we must do so discreetly. The Faith Militant roams the roads and the Crownlands may be contested. We can't risk open confrontation with a large force just yet. Jaime nodded vigorously. Agreed. The High Sparrow will label us heretics, kidnappers. I can only imagine how he's twisting it. But if we can get Tommen to the Rock, we can rally the West. Then perhaps we can negotiate from a position of strength or face them if it comes to war. Daemon's eyes were hard. War may be inevitable, Jaime. The Faith commands thousands of devoted followers. They might have allies among lords who resent your family's hold on the throne. The realm is a tinderbox. One spark and it all burns. A flash of memory seized Jaime, wildfire under King's Landing, the day he had slain the Mad King to prevent destruction. Would the city now burn in a different conflagration, lit by fanaticism? He forced himself to stay calm. We'll do what we must. For now, we get Tommen safely to the Rock. That night, the entire camp buzzed with subdued excitement. The presence of the king, though a weary, shaken boy, energized the soldiers. They treated him with reverence, though Tommen scarcely seemed to register it. He kept glancing around as if the Faith's star hammers might appear out of the darkness to drag him away again. Jaime tried to reassure him, staying close. A maester visited Tommen, checking for any injuries or fever. The boy was physically well aside from bruises, hunger, and exhaustion. Ser Lucas, on the other hand, was in dire shape from the infected gash. The maester set about treating him properly, using prepared salves and a needle to drain the wound. There was hope, but it would be a slow recovery. Around a campfire, Jaime met with Daemon, Davin, and a few of the senior knights. They planned the route west, deciding to avoid major roads as long as they were in the Crownlands or the Reach. The Faith might have watchers at every key crossing. Daemon proposed traveling in a compact formation, no more than 30 men, while the rest of his force scattered to create false trails. They would travel in the early morning, keep the king's presence discreet, and make for the Gold Road near the border of the Westerlands. Once in Lannister territory, they could muster additional escorts. Jaime agreed to the plan. Quietly, he asked Daemon if there had been any word from Kevin or from King's Landing about the fate of the others. Daemon's jaw tightened. I only know that the High Sparrow was incensed when word spread you'd escaped with Tommen. They say he's declared you an enemy of the Faith, urging all loyal worshippers to apprehend you. So far, Kevin remains in King's Landing, trying to maintain what he can, but his influence is waning fast. He's effectively a hostage, though not in chains. A pang of guilt gripped Jaime. Kevin had sacrificed what little leverage he had to give them a chance. We'll remember his sacrifice, he said quietly. When we're strong enough, we'll return. Daemon's eyes clouded with doubt. I only hope the realm isn't in ashes by then. The next morning, the camp was astir before dawn. Men packed tents, saddled horses, loaded supplies. Tommen was given a sturdy palfrey, no warhorse, but a gentle mount more suited to his skill. Jaime received a proper destrier, a powerful bay stallion that seemed impatient to ride. Daemon had the men form a tight column. Lucas, still too weak to ride properly, would remain on a travois, tended by the maester. They'd move slowly, but more swiftly than Jaime's ragged band had managed alone. As the sun's first rays crept over the horizon, the column set out, heading westward along lesser-traveled paths. Scouts rode ahead, scanning for any sign of Faith Militant patrols. The autumn landscape stretched around them. Brown grasses, bare-limbed trees, the occasional distant farm. The men were disciplined and quiet, their breath steaming in the crisp morning air. Tommen rode near Jaime, glancing at him occasionally as though seeking reassurance. Jaime kept his gold hand on the reins, his real hand free to reach for his sword if needed. In a soft tone, he murmured, "We'll be at the rock soon. That was your grandfather's seat. You visited once when you were younger, but you may not remember. It's a mighty fortress, built into the stone cliffs. No army has ever taken it." Tommen nodded, a ghost of a smile flickering over his face. Mother used to talk about it. She said it was her real home, more than King's Landing. Jaime's throat tightened. Yes, she was proud of it. She wanted you to know your heritage there. Tommen swallowed, tears threatening. She never even got to see it again. Jaime reached over, gently gripping the boy's arm. "I know, but she wanted you safe. She fought for that in her own way." He forced a small, encouraging smile. "We'll carry on. The Lannister name isn't finished yet." They rode through the day. Every hour, scouts returned with reports, signs of faith patrols on certain roads, a small skirmish in a distant hamlet. Daemon navigated them around potential trouble, though it forced them onto bumpy trails. That night, they made a hidden camp in a hollow near a stream, posting double watch. Tommen, worn to the bone, fell asleep almost the moment he slid off his saddle. On the second day, the scouts encountered a group of travelers, poor farmers fleeing the warlike conditions near King's Landing. They spoke of more zealots occupying towns, searching wagons, confiscating property from any who might shelter the traitor king. Daemon's face was grim as he heard it. "They're calling him a traitor, the rightful monarch." Jaime shrugged bitterly. "The High Sparrow calls him a puppet under my corrupting influence, I'm sure. The zealots claim the gods decide who is king, so if Tommen flees their divine guidance, that makes him unfit. It's madness." Word also reached them that a few minor lords in the Crownlands had bent the knee to the faith, placing their small holds under the protection of the Militant. The more Jaime heard, the clearer it became that the faith's power was spreading outward from the capital. As the realm's confusion grew, more lords weighed self-preservation over loyalty to a young king on the run. House Lannister alone might not suffice to restore Tommen's authority. Allies would be needed, yet who would stand with them? The Tyrells, still stinging from Marjorie's imprisonment months ago, might be open to an accord. The Tullys were battered, the Starks in turmoil, the Martells resentful. Even the Baratheon line was in disarray. Late on the third day, they caught their first glimpse of the distant foothills that marked the boundary of the Westerlands. Jaime felt a stirring of relief. Beyond those hills lay Lannister lands, towns that would rally to their banner, the security of castles that recognized House Lannister's might. Daemon sent riders ahead to confirm that no faith detachments blocked the pass. As dusk fell, the column climbed a winding trail through a rocky defile, the horses' hooves clattering on loose stones. The air grew sharper, cooler. Tommen rode silently, gaze fixed on the path as though each step might bring a horde of zealots crashing down on them. Jaime stayed close, scanning every boulder, every twist in the trail. The realm was too unpredictable now to take anything for granted. At last, they emerged onto a plateau overlooking rolling terrain. In the far distance, they could see the outlines of mountains that rose like a fortress wall. Daemon halted the column, letting the men dismount for a brief rest. He gestured for Jaime to come closer. "We're almost home. Another day, maybe two, and we'll be in range of a friendly fortress. Then we can send ravens to the rock itself." Jaime exhaled shakily. "Thank the gods." Daemon's lips twitched in a strained smile. "Perhaps. But once the High Sparrow learns you've made it home, he might call for a holy war. The West could become a battlefield. Be ready." Jaime nodded, a knot tightening in his gut. He had dreaded the prospect from the start. Still, nothing could be done. The faith had made Tommen's submission a condition of his life. With them gone, war was the only recourse unless some miracle changed the High Sparrow's mind. And Jaime had seen no sign that the man possessed any capacity for compromise. They rode onward into twilight, seeking a suitable campsite. The land was rougher, dotted with scraggly shrubs and rocky outcrops. A chill wind cut through their cloaks. Jaime caught glimpses of Tommen's face in the last light, etched with weariness, but also with a faint determination. The boy had changed, in small ways, from the soft child who once played with kittens and toy soldiers in the Red Keep. Hardship forced maturity even on one so young. They made camp in a small ravine, hidden from casual view. Fires were kept low, men ate in somber quiet. Jaime sat with Tommen, sharing a bowl of stew. Around them, knights and soldiers hunkered in the gloom, mindful of possible pursuit. The half-moon rose, casting pale light on the rocky slopes. Tommen set aside his half-eaten portion, looking at Jaime with troubled eyes. "Uncle, when we get to Casterly Rock, do I have to raise an army? Send them to fight the Faith?" Jaime hesitated. "If the Faith attacks, we'll have to defend ourselves. But maybe we can negotiate. Demand the High Sparrow free your Uncle Kevin, restore your authority. That you'll respect the Seven, but not as their puppet." He didn't truly believe such a negotiation would succeed, yet he had to offer Tommen some hope. Tommen's gaze dropped. "I don't want more blood. Mother. I lost her already. So many died in the war with Stannis, and before that. Why can't we just? I don't know. Why can't the Faith just let me be king in peace? Because they want power, Jaime thought. But he only said, "We'll do our best to end this without needless killing." The boy nodded uncertainly, letting Jaime tuck a cloak around him. Soon, Tommen dozed off against a boulder, lulled by exhaustion. Jaime sat there, his mind churning through what lay ahead. He could not be certain of House Lannister's strength. Could they truly stand against the Faith and its tide of fanaticism? If rumors of Daenerys Targaryen were true and she landed soon, the realm might splinter further. The wheel of war might turn once more, grinding everything beneath it. And yet, as he gazed at the sleeping Tommen, he felt a resurgence of resolve. Cersei had died to protect her children's future in her twisted way. He would not let that sacrifice go in vain. He was Jaime Lannister, a knight once scorned as the Kingslayer, but now forging a fragile path for his nephew king. He had compromised his honor 1,000 times. But for Tommen's sake, he would do it all again. If war was the price of freeing the realm from zealotry, then so be it. The next morning came with a frigid wind. They broke camp early, climbing higher into the rocky hills. By midday, they spotted a tower in the distance, an old watchtower that marked the boundary of the Westerlands. Daemon's men cheered softly. Some had tears in their eyes. Home after so much danger. Jaime felt a pang of longing for the rock's great halls, for the vantage above the sea. Soon, Tommen would see it again now. Or truly for the first time, given how young he'd been before. Yet the journey was not done. They rode another half-day before spotting a small fortress perched on a crag of stone. A banner with the golden lion flew from its ramparts. Daemon led them up a winding approach, signaling to the gatehouse. The men posted on the walls peered down, then recognized the Lannister arms. The portcullis rattled upward. Inside, they were greeted by a wizened castellan who welcomed them. "Sir Daemon, we did not expect you so soon." Then his eyes fell upon Jaime and Tommen, and they widened. "My lord, my king." Jaime dismounted, helping Tommen do the same. "We need shelter and ravens. The Faith is on our heels. We must reach Casterly Rock as soon as possible." The castellan bowed deeply. "Of course, my lords. We will send word at once." He ordered men to help stable the horses, provide hot meals, and prepare chambers. Despite the fortress's modest size, it felt like a palace compared to the wilds they had traversed. At dinner that night, fresh bread, roast mutton, and ale, Tommen still ate sparingly, as if fearful of plenty. Jaime gently encouraged him. "You'll need your strength," he said. The boy nodded and managed a few more bites. Daemon sat on the other side, conferring with the castellan about how to arrange an escort strong enough to deter bandits or Faith patrols along the final stretch to the rock. When the meal ended, Jaime guided Tommen to a small solar where a roaring fire brought warmth to the stone walls. The boy sank onto a cushioned bench, his eyes drooping. Jaime placed a hand on his shoulder. "Rest. Soon, we'll be at the rock and the real planning begins." Tommen gazed into the flames, voice a soft mumble. "Sometimes I wish we could go back. Before all this. When I didn't know anything about wars or faith or politics. When I had mother." Tears threatened again, but he wiped them away. Jaime sighed, kneeling beside him. "I know. The realm is cruel. We can't go back. We can only go forward." Tommen sniffed, leaning against Jaime's shoulder. "I'm scared, uncle." Jaime stroked the boy's hair, recalling how he'd once done that for a toddler who needed comfort after a nightmare. "We all are," he admitted. "Courage is doing what we must, even when we're scared." Tommen nodded, eyes flickering shut. Jaime stayed there, letting the warmth of the fire envelop them both. For a moment, he allowed himself the illusion that everything might be all right, that House Lannister could prevail without igniting another war that would devour the Seven Kingdoms. Yet deep down, he knew the challenges had only begun. The Faith Militant was not about to relinquish its grip on King's Landing. Kevin remained at their mercy. Thousands of devout men and women believed Tommen had sinned by fleeing. And in the wings stood the rest of Westeros, each house nursing old grudges or biding time to strike. Even so, this was the best chance they had, a chance to preserve Tommen's life and reclaim some measure of rightful authority. Together, they would face whatever trials lay ahead. For now, in the glow of the firelight, Jaime listened to Tommen's slow, steady breathing and felt the burden of Cersei's memory press just a bit lighter on his heart. If she were here, she would be relentless in forging a path to victory no matter the cost. He could almost hear her fierce whisper, "Do whatever it takes. They took my head, but they will never tame the lion's roar." He closed his eyes, letting her voice echo in the depths of his mind. Tomorrow, they would ride for Casterly Rock. Tomorrow, they would muster their banners, fortify their walls, and send ravens across the realm, proclaiming that the Boy King stood in the west under the protection of House Lannister. Tomorrow, the dance of steel and faith would resume, and the outcome was anything but certain. But tonight, at least, they had hope, fragile though it was, a chance for Tommen to fulfill the promise of his birth, a chance for Jaime to protect his sister's last living son, a chance for the realm to find some shred of balance between crown and faith. And if the path to that balance was lined with swords and blood, Jaime Lannister would wield steel without hesitation, for he had already lost too much to ever bow again.